When I was newly single after my 2-year relationship ended, I was back to living alone and swiping on Tinder and all those apps. I had been single for a few months already and had met a few people during that time. One of them was a girl named Tracy. She gave me her Snapchat, but it quickly fizzled out, with her just watching my stories and not really communicating. That kind of thing used to happen all the time when I was in college, but now in my late 20s, using Tinder just reminds me of how immature all this online dating stuff is. It feels a lot different at this age. I own a corner townhome in a small community, and if you're wondering, I'm an accountant. Good money, but miserably boring. After my ex moved out, I thought I would be ready for privacy and peace and quiet, but I'd say after the first month, the novelty of that wore off. Maybe I'm more of a relationship person, or I just need people around, but being alone was getting to me. That's why I was constantly swiping on dating apps and trying to go on dates just to get out of the house. This was last December. I posted something on my Snap story related to Christmas, and guess who commented? It was Tracy, the girl I hadn't spoken to in weeks. She struck up a conversation about us doing some Christmas-themed things together, and from there, we started chatting for a bit. I suggested the most festive things I could think of, like ice skating or going to the village to look at the decorations. But she suggested we decorate my Christmas tree. First off, I had a fake tree, but it was up in the attic. I told her I hadn't set it up yet because it's kind of a two-person job getting it out of the attic. She said she'd gladly come over and help, so I figured, why not? I told her to come over around 9 that night. It was already dark when we made the plan. I remember hurriedly grabbing my keys and rushing to the liquor store to buy a couple of bottles of wine. When I got back to the house, I vacuumed and swept the floors. Ever since my breakup, the things my girlfriend used to do to clean the place were left to me, and I realized how quickly a place can get dirty. 9 p.m. rolled around, and I was low-key sitting upright on the couch, pretending like I was just chilling in the living room, watching a movie. I had set everything up to be cozy and relaxing, but I sat there for a while waiting on her to message me or for the doorbell. I sent a follow-up saying, "Let me know when you're on your way." And I eventually started to think she was flaking, until finally around 9:30, she said she was outside. She came inside and I was shocked to find that I was looking up at her. She was a couple of inches taller than me. I'm 5'10", so she had to be at least 6 feet tall. I also immediately noticed that she smelt like she was drenched in perfume. We went straight to the couch and sat down, and she sat really close to me, like our legs were touching. This is where I started to get confused about how I was feeling. She looked a bit older, maybe a little rougher. I'm not sure how to explain it, and underneath that overpowering smell of cheap perfume, I couldn't help but feel like there was a slight hint of body odor, which completely turned me off. I asked her if she wanted wine, and she said, "Yes, please." So I went and poured a couple of glasses as we talked. Have you ever met someone for the first time after texting or DMing for a while, and when you finally meet, they end up being nothing like you pictured? That was pretty much this. Something about her felt off, like she lacked certain social cues. I handed her a glass of Merlot, and we cheered each other. I swear she almost immediately spilt a huge drop of red wine on my light blue couch. I composed myself, but I wanted to scream. I said, "It's okay," as I ran to the kitchen to get a damp paper towel and sponge. I ran back to the couch and blotted it as quickly as I could before it could settle. She kept apologizing, and I kept saying it was okay. After this, things got a little more tense, and to break the tension, I suggested I get the tree out of the attic. I went up to the attic, slid over the giant box with all the tree parts in it, and started handing her the pieces one by one, each piece getting bigger until we got to the biggest part, the part I wouldn't be able to handle going down the ladder on my own. She grabbed it with ease. I had to remember how big this girl was. Once everything was handed down, we went back downstairs and assembled the tree in the living room with Christmas music playing. I poured her more wine, and I drank more myself. I loosened up a bit. More wine makes any situation feel better. Once we had the tree set up, the next step was the ornaments. I told her my ornaments were in the crawl space. These ornaments were from my childhood. My parents gave me bins and bins of Christmas decorations. I went down to the crawl space, and one by one I started taking out the bins while I left Tracy in the living room to relax. As I was doing all of this, I started feeling woozy, like the wine was getting to my head. I've never been a heavy drinker, so I have a low tolerance, but I felt like I hadn't drunk that much to feel this way. I grabbed the first bin and started lugging it up the stairs. By the time I got to the top, Tracy wasn't anywhere in sight. I assumed she was in the bathroom at first and called her name. I looked around each room and then saw that the bathroom was empty. I scratched my head in confusion as I kept calling her name. I went to message her on Snapchat, but she never opened the snap. I checked the 2 bedrooms too, but she was gone. I couldn't believe this. She snuck out on me. This was when I started wondering if she thought I was ugly or weird or something, even though, truthfully, I wasn't really into her either. I crashed onto the couch, which suddenly felt a lot more comfortable than before, and honestly, as far as I remember, I periodically checked my phone to see if she opened my snap, just watching whatever was on TV until my memory faded to black. I swear everything just went black, and then I woke up in darkness. No lights, no TV on. I looked around in the dark room, and I knew I was hearing things. I felt like I was still on the couch and felt weak. My limbs were hard to move, but I managed to find my phone right under me within seconds. I checked the time. The second the phone screen lit up, I saw it, even though the light was facing toward me. That glow from my phone screen with the brightness all the way up revealed the outline of a tall person's silhouette standing in front of me. For some reason, I didn't scream. I just put the phone down, bringing the room back to darkness. I finally opened my mouth to say, "Tracy?" hoping it was her, but still not remembering what had happened earlier. Whoever was standing there didn't answer me. I eventually picked my phone back up, turned on the flashlight, and saw that it was, in fact, Tracy standing in front of me. She wasn't moving. She was just looking down at me. I felt locked to the couch. I don't know if it was because of pure fear or the effects of whatever she had obviously laced me with, but I genuinely was having a hard time moving my limbs. I felt weak and helpless. All I could manage to say was, "Tracy," a couple more times. She turned toward the stairs, and again, I swear she sprinted toward them. All I heard were the disturbingly loud stomps of her running down the stairs. I heard something slam from downstairs. Looking back, I'd imagine it was the front door. Everything looked and sounded so wonky in those minutes after I woke up. Each passing minute, I felt more and more clear-headed, and moving became easier. I checked Snapchat to see that her account was gone, aka she blocked me. I looked out the front window and saw no cars outside besides my own and the neighbors. Then I realized I never saw the vehicle she arrived in, or if she even arrived in one. I checked my entire home from top to bottom, looking for anything that could have been stolen. The only items I found missing seemed kind of bizarre at first, but honestly made so much sense. Soon after, every last bottle of pills from my house was gone. My vitamins and supplements, my bottles of Adderall, and even the bottle of Oxy that I had prescribed but never fully used after a surgery. Those were in the drawer next to my bed. I noticed a bottle of vodka was taken from my mini fridge in my room too. But other than that, I didn't see anything else that could have been stolen. Still, I called the police right then and reported the robbery. I gave them the Snapchat username and explained that I never got her number or knew anything really about her identity, except the name she gave me, which was Tracy Gibson. The police knocked on my neighbor's door, since all of our homes are attached, even though it was like 1 a.m. with me standing next to them. They asked if he'd seen or heard anything strange, to which he said no. He'd been asleep. After about 20 minutes, the police left. I made sure all of my keys were still in place to prevent her from getting back in. But other than that, this Tracy person disappeared without a trace. I knew her behavior was quirky and odd from the first few minutes of meeting her, and it makes so much sense now. I won't even call it a theory, because I just know this is the truth. I think that girl, or woman I should say, was older than she claimed and was potentially homeless with a serious drug addiction. I think she drowned herself in perfume to mask the body odor that was honestly still showing through. She laced my wine with something when I was in the attic. Clearly, I don't know exactly how long I was out, but it was enough for her to scour my entire home for any and all drugs and supplements. I still remember how disturbing it was to see her tall silhouette standing in front of me while I was just waking up on the couch. Honestly, after this, I didn't even decorate the tree that year. This happened on Christmas Eve back in 1997 when I was 7 years old. Since we're Jewish, we don't celebrate Christmas, so Christmas Eve was just like any other night for us. Our dad is a doctor, and since he's Jewish, he always works on call at the hospital during the Christmas holidays, so he wasn't home that night. That just left my little sister and me by ourselves for the evening, while our dad worked. Technically, our mom was home, but to be blunt, she was an alcoholic back then. Being a 7-year-old, I had no idea what alcoholism was. All I knew was that my mom was always passed out once it got dark and nearly impossible to wake up. Sorry if it sounds harsh or TMI, but it's relevant to my story. My sister and I were downstairs watching TV when we heard a knock at the door. Being the oldest, I went to see who it was. Our door had glass panes built into it, which made it easy to see who was on the other side. There was a man standing outside in a Santa suit holding a bag, and when he saw me, he smiled and waved at me to come to the door. I went near the door but did not open it, and I thought it was odd that someone dressed like Santa would come to our house out of anyone's house in the neighborhood. He said, "Hey kid, it's me, Santa. Let me in, I'll give you your presents." I remember point blank telling him that Santa isn't real, and that if he was, he doesn't give Jews presents anyway. That's when he said, "Of course I'm real." In the past, I only used to visit Christian homes, but lately I felt bad that Jewish kids never got any presents. So this year, I changed the rules so that you can get presents too. But I didn't buy it, and instead I remember getting mad at him, arguing that Jews get presents, we just get them during Hanukkah and not on Christmas. The smile fell from his face, and all his jolly charm disappeared as he began demanding I open the door. I told my sister to dial 911, and the guy seemed to run away. We did call the cops. However, unfortunately, the operator didn't understand what we were saying. Looking back, I think she may have thought we were just little kids excited that Santa Claus was coming to our house. Regardless, she didn't take us seriously and instead just told us that this number was to be used for emergencies only before disconnecting the call. My sister and I now got really scared because we didn't know who else to call since we were only 4 and 7. The only numbers we knew how to dial were our home number and 911. And since this was the 90s, my dad didn't have a cell phone yet, and I had no idea what the hospital number was to reach him there. And with our mom impossible to wake up, we were essentially on our own. We hoped the man wouldn't come back, but a few minutes later, he was knocking on the door again. He said he knew the cops weren't coming and to go ahead and let him in, or we'd be in big trouble. My sister started crying and ran upstairs trying to wake my mom. Not knowing what else to do, I did the one thing that made sense to my 7-year-old brain. I grabbed a bunch of candles we keep for our menorah and lit them all, then ran below where the smoke detector was. I blew out all the candles quickly before tossing them all up to the smoke detector. Thankfully, they gave off enough smoke to set off the smoke alarm. As an adult, I realized how stupid this was, and fortunately, I didn't accidentally set the house on fire. But at that time, all I knew was that the smoke alarm would instantly call 911 for me and send help to our home. There was a fire department not even 2 minutes from our house, so they got here pretty fast. My sister came downstairs scared of the fire alarm, but I told her there was no fire and to not go outside, but instead wait inside with me. To my amazement, the guy still did not leave. Instead, the bastard ran to the firefighters, presumably telling them that he was glad they showed up. I remember that he claimed he was my dad and that he dressed up like Santa Claus for Christmas Eve to surprise us. He explained that his suit didn't have any pockets to hold his keys and that with the door locked, he couldn't get the door open to save us from the fire. So he begged the firefighters to break down the door, and surprisingly, the firefighters seemed to believe him. They were actually getting ready to break down the door and told us to stand back. But we started crying, shouting at them that he's not our dad, that our dad is working at the hospital, and that we have no idea who this guy was, and that we don't even celebrate Christmas. The firefighter who was about to break down the door thankfully stopped and listened to us. He asked, "You don't celebrate Christmas?" I told him no because we're Jewish and showed him my kippah on my head as well as our menorah. I then broke down crying, explaining how I set off the smoke alarm to try and get help because the police wouldn't believe us, and so please don't let the guy in. The firefighter thankfully believed me and then asked the guy why Santa would show up to a Jewish home. I don't remember exactly what the guy said, but the firefighters clearly didn't believe him. Two of them wrestled the guy to the ground while the other called the police to come by. They also asked what hospital my dad worked at so they could let him know what was going on. The police arrived and arrested the guy while another officer stayed with us until my dad came home and explained the situation to him. My dad was furious with our mom for being wasted and essentially sleeping through the whole thing, but mostly he was grateful that we were okay. As far as Christmases go, I was glad to have our usual boring and quiet Christmas the following year. To this day, I think being Jewish saved my sisters and my lives, because had we opened that door to let Santa in, there's a good chance that would have been our final Christmas. It was December 2022. My girlfriend Charlotte and I were driving to the Pocono Mountains. We had rented a super cozy-looking Airbnb, decked out with Christmas decorations, and it was nicely located with a great view, a big property, and not far from a cute little village. To make things even more festive, a snowstorm was coming that night, so we set out a little earlier to allow time to get groceries and everything set up at the Airbnb. The drive from the city to the Poconos was about 4 hours. We made decent time, stopped at a Family Dollar for some snacks and groceries, and then went straight to the Airbnb. We turned onto the uphill gravel road through a clearing in the trees that led to the property. The house was surrounded by woods. It had a big deck with a hot tub on it, which was very appealing, especially the idea of sitting in it during a snowstorm. There were a bunch of Christmas decorations on the property, including some light-up reindeer, a big snowman, and large decorative candy canes lining the walkway to the front deck. We had to make a few trips to and from the car to bring everything inside. First impression, the place had a very comfy feeling, just as we expected from the pictures. It had a Christmas tree in one corner, stockings hung on the walls, and a bunch of smaller decorations scattered about. It had that welcoming smell of wood that you'd expect in a country log cabin, though it was more of a regular house. Then I realized why there was a stack of logs next to a big fireplace in the living room. There were 3 bedrooms, though. Of course, we only needed one. We put our luggage and such in a second bedroom. I did the usual stuff like inspecting the fridge, turning on the TV to see if there was cable or Netflix, and looking out all the windows. There was an upstairs, but it was more of a loft with a pool table and a couple of couches. Then there was a basement. For the hell of it, I went down to check it out. It was fairly big relative to the size of the house. It felt disconnected from the Airbnb, though it wasn't furnished for hanging out in. It was dark and cold and felt more like a space to do laundry, a workspace. Then there was a knock at the front door. I hurried to answer it, and there was a guy who looked to be in his late 40s. He was wearing gray sweatpants and a ripped-up yellowish-brown jacket. He smiled at me and said, "How are you folks doing?" I replied, "Good," and asked him if he was the Airbnb host. He replied that he runs the place with his brother. I asked for his name, and he said Tom. Tom said he lives just up the road next door if my girlfriend and I need anything. I thanked him, and then he walked away. I found it interesting that he knew I was with my girlfriend. Charlotte didn't come to the door, but maybe his brother told him about us. I had had a conversation with Mike, the host, about it being my girlfriend's, and my wanting to do something festive. It was pitch black out, and it was snowing. We cranked up the heat in the house and started preparing the dinner we bought, which was chicken thighs, broccoli, potatoes, and cornbread. It was pretty much a grab bag. We ate on the couch with the Christmas tree lights on in the corner, giving the room a nice comfy glow as we watched the Polar Express. It was the only good Christmas movie on any of the streaming platforms. If you can't tell, we really love Christmas. After the movie, when we felt we had digested enough, we went outside to the deck to hop in the hot tub. I turned on all the decorations and Christmas lights in the front yard, and as we sat in the hot tub watching the snowfall, it felt like bliss, until the bubbles on the hot tub stopped and it went silent. We heard unmistakable footsteps from somewhere on the property. Charlotte and I looked at one another. I asked her if I should shout, "Who's there?" But she said no. The footsteps moved further and further until they were no longer audible. I told Charlotte it was probably a deer, but deep down I knew those were the footsteps of a person. After the hot tub, we went to take a shower before bed. The hot water in the shower didn't last for more than maybe 2 minutes, though. Something was wrong when the water turned ice cold. We screamed and jumped out of the shower. I messaged Mike, the host, about it. He responded within half an hour saying that's odd and that he'll have a guy come and look at the hot water heater tomorrow. We went to sleep after our half shower. In the middle of the night, though, we awoke to very aggressive bangs on the front door of the house. Charlotte was shaking me, terrified. I said I was going to check who it was, but she demanded I stay in bed and not make a sound. Honestly, I was glad she said that. No part of me wanted to know who was at the door in the middle of the night. I think there were 3 sets of really loud and angry-sounding bangs before they stopped. We sat upright for a few minutes in silence, whispering to each other. I went over to lock the bedroom door for added security, I guess. Minutes dragged on, but ultimately, after about half an hour of sitting wide awake, we eventually drifted back to sleep. First thing in the morning, I messaged Mike again about the knocks at the door. He answered more quickly this time, seeming pretty confused, like us. He basically said how strange that is. He didn't know why anyone would be roaming around late at night like that. He said if anything like that happens again, we should alert the authorities. Honestly, not the most reassuring response, but I mean, he was right. What else could he tell us? Grab a gun and shoot whoever was at the door? I didn't want to keep complaining to Mike constantly, but these were some valid concerns I was bringing up to him. There was a lot of snow outside, and it was a dark, cloudy day. There were still some flurries falling onto the ground. I went out to wipe the snow off my Jeep, and while I was doing so, I noticed footprints in the snow. They looped around the house. I remembered the knocks from the night before, and wondered if they were from the same person, but these footprints looked fresh, and it had snowed all night. Surely the footprints from last night would have filled in by now. I heard footsteps approaching now, actually, and I saw Tom walking from around my car. I told him about the hot water heater problem and that Mike said they were sending someone to take a look at it. He said he knew and that he was here to take a look at it, actually. I also told him about the knocks at the door last night and the footprints in the snow. I even showed him. He looked at them and said, "There are a lot of strange folk out here who go snooping around at night." I asked if we should refrain from using the hot tub at night, and he said no. That shouldn't be a problem. The people around here are harmless. He went inside the house and walked around for a bit before heading down to the basement. He told me he'd have a look at the hot water heater. Tom seems like a weird dude, honestly. I messaged Mike saying Tom's here now checking out the water heater. Mike replied back asking, "Is Tom the name of the plumber?" And I replied, "No, your brother." He replied, "What do you mean?" He said he's my brother. It started to click in my head. I responded, "Do you have a brother named Tom who runs this Airbnb with you?" And he replied, "No, who is this person?" I hurried to Charlotte and told her to collect her things quietly. We need to get out of here as quickly as we could. We packed our bags, grabbed all of our stuff, and brought it outside to the car in one trip. I'm sure we left behind a charger or something small, but who cares? We got in my car, and when I started it, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Tom quickly approaching the rear of the Jeep. I put it in drive and drove out of there as quickly as I could. When we were back on the road, we called Mike and explained everything and told him he needs to call the police now. He didn't stay on the line with us for long, but 20 minutes later he called us back. We were still in the car. He said the police were there now and didn't see anyone in the house. Mike was on his way to the house as well, but he was mostly calling to get more details from us. We drove around the area and explored just as a way to calm our nerves after what just happened. After a few hours, we drove home. Mike messaged me later that night, updating me and apologizing for everything. He said he didn't know anyone who resembled my description of Tom. What disturbs me is that man was watching us the entire time from the moment we arrived to when we were in the hot tub, and he was probably the one banging on the front door in the middle of the night. Who knows what his intentions were? It's a good thing we left when we did, though. When I was a kid around 9 or 10, my dad got a really high-paying job that forced us to move from middle-of-nowhere Pennsylvania to Brookmont, Maryland. I say forced, but that's probably not the best way to describe what happened. In reality, my parents were thrilled to make the move. It was a decision they barely thought about. In the span of about a month, we went from this tiny rundown house in a relatively low-income area to a massive property in one of Maryland's nicest suburbs. You might be wondering how I felt about the whole thing. At that age, I was a pretty antisocial kid and mostly kept to myself, so it's not like I was leaving any lifelong friends behind. I didn't really have any to begin with. Years later, my parents would tell me that the prospect of giving me a fresh start was one of the reasons they were so willing to uproot our entire lives. But that's neither here nor there. The move didn't bother me much, and I was able to adjust pretty quickly. It's not like adjusting was very difficult given the circumstances, though. Like I said, the house was huge, and even my 10-year-old self could pick up on the fact that we wouldn't be struggling to make ends meet anymore. I'm not going to bore you with the pointless details about the inside of the house. I'll only tell you what you need to know. I had two older brothers, Sean and Harold. The backyard was easily our favorite part. It had a big plot of twisting hedges that made for perfect games of hide and seek, tag, or whatever else we came up with. But the best feature by far was the treehouse at the right edge of the property. Each house on the block was separated by a decently large cluster of tall trees, and the treehouse was situated directly within that patch. I say treehouse, but it was more like a tree castle. It wasn't your dad's run-of-the-mill weekend project. It was massive, spanning 6 or 7 adjacent trees. It had 3 different levels and an actual staircase built into it. Not those flimsy planks you're probably used to seeing. It was obvious a professional had built it. For a while, my brothers and I played in the treehouse every day. It was always the highlight of our day. But eventually my brothers got bored of the treehouse. They were older and in that awful teenage phase where nothing was cool anymore. Eventually, I was the only one who played up there, which kinda sucked. I was really torn up about basically being abandoned up there, but my brothers refused to come back no matter what I said. One day I climbed up into the treehouse and found a folded piece of paper sitting in the corner. To this day, I still remember the exact words written on that first note. It said, "Hello, I'm the Marshmallow Man. It's nice to meet you. What's your name?" I was the happiest kid alive. I assumed it was one of my brothers playing a game with me, so I played along, hoping to re-interest them in the treehouse. There was a stack of paper in the treehouse that hadn't been there before, so I eagerly picked up one of the markers we had in there and wrote back, leaving a little note with my name. I placed it where I'd found the first one, excited to play this new game. That night I wanted to ask my brothers which of them was the Marshmallow Man, but I was afraid they'd stop playing if I said anything, so I kept quiet. For the next few days, I'd come home from school and run straight to the treehouse. Each time, there'd be another note waiting for me. At first, the notes were innocent and sounded exactly like stuff my brothers would say. I was having a lot of fun with it, but as the days went on, the notes got stranger. The Marshmallow Man started asking me increasingly personal questions that I didn't fully understand. Things that didn't make sense for my brothers to ask, like, "What's your favorite time of day to play outside?" Or, "What do you usually eat for breakfast?" I don't remember every question he asked, but one of them that will always stick with me was, "Which window in the house is your bedroom?" I look back at that exact question and literally feel sick to my stomach. At the time, I still didn't think too much of it. I assumed it was still one of my brothers, so I answered every question without hesitation. But the next note was so unsettling that I couldn't keep quiet anymore. It was something like, "What do your pajamas smell like?" Or something nasty along those lines. I stormed inside and confronted my brothers, demanding to know which of them was behind the notes. They both started laughing at me and denied it. Both of them swore there was no such thing as the Marshmallow Man and started making fun of me for still playing make-believe. I started crying and ran out of the room. I remember being a mixture of sad and angry. I knew one of them had to be lying. Instead of going to my parents, I hatched a plan to catch them in the act. I was not prepared for what was about to happen. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard tapping at my window. I froze, feeling my heart start to beat out of my chest. I was already scared of the dark to begin with, so the tapping added a layer of fear that I couldn't deal with. I sat there in the dark for what felt like hours, too scared to move. Eventually, I forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I pulled back the window curtains and almost screamed. Taped to the outside of my window were dozens of marshmallows. It had to be my brothers. I was so angry. This wasn't funny anymore. I decided I'd catch them red-handed the next night. I pretended like I hadn't noticed the marshmallows and didn't say a thing to either of them all day. Later that night, I was ready. When the clanging started again, I jumped out of bed and yanked the curtains open, ready to yell at them. But it wasn't my brothers. On the other side of the glass was a man. An old, disgusting man with yellow eyes and what looked like rotting teeth. He had patchy hair on his head and smiled at me when he noticed me looking. I don't think I've ever screamed louder in my life. I felt like I was going to die in that moment. My parents came running, but by the time they got to my room, the man was gone. It was a huge thing. The police searched the property, combing through every inch of the yard and treehouse, but they didn't find anything. They even checked the surrounding area, but that man was never found. Some of our neighbors came outside to see what was going on and reacted in horror when my parents filled them in. I told the police and my parents everything I knew, but there wasn't much I could even say. They took the notes in as evidence, but I doubt they really did anything with them. The man never came back. My parents told me to never play in the treehouse again, but it's not like I wanted to after that incident anyway. I moved out of that house a while ago, but my parents still live there, and I always take an extra long look at the treehouse whenever I'm back. This remains one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me. This memory has been on my mind a lot lately. My youngest son Luke just went off to college, and while I'm proud of him, the house feels quieter than it ever has before. Too quiet, if I'm being honest. It's funny when the kids are young, you dream of peace and quiet, but when it finally comes, it's not as comforting as you thought it would be. I don't know why, but his going away unlocked a part of my brain that honestly forgot about what I'm about to tell you. People have told my wife and I that it's normal to be thinking a little extra about memories from my kids' childhood at a time like this, so I guess it's not too surprising. I still remember when he was just a little kid, full of energy and curiosity, always getting into something. There's one memory I have of that time that is definitely not all sunshine and rainbows, though. Luke was 8 years old when this happens. Even now, I can't fully make sense of it. I'm a carpenter by trade, so I'm pretty good with my hands. Always have been. I will admit that I was much more lively back then, willing to undertake all sorts of makeshift projects and such. One of my favorite projects was the tree house I built for Luke in the backyard, which is still standing to this day. It wasn't just a simple platform nailed to a tree. I poured my heart into it. Walls, a roof, proper wooden steps leading up to the entrance. It was sturdy too. I wanted it to feel like an extension of our house to him, and I definitely succeeded in that regard. My wife Christy wasn't thrilled about it at first. She worried it was too high off the ground and unsafe. But Luke was the kind of kid who was always climbing trees anyway, and I figured it would be safer to give him a proper ladder rather than let him scramble up branches that could snap. Christy eventually came around, and Luke absolutely loved it. I should probably tell you a little bit about our property so that the story makes more sense. Our house was at the very end of a dead-end street in a relatively woodsy area. The backyard actually bordered the woods, which was part of why Christy and I fell in love with the house in the first place. It was private and peaceful, and we're the kind of people that like keeping to ourselves. I still laugh when I think about all the times friends and family members have gotten lost trying to find our house. The yard wasn't huge, but I could clearly see the treehouse from our bedroom window, which was one of the deciding factors when I was determining where to build it. I wanted to be able to keep an eye on it should Luke hurt himself or something like that. I couldn't actually see inside of it because of the walls, but I had a perfect view of the steps leading up to it. From what I remember, everything was relatively normal for a pretty long time. Luke spent what I considered a normal amount of time playing in the treehouse. His older brother had kind of outgrown that phase, so Luke mostly played by himself in there. I can't remember exactly when, but at one point he started talking about an imaginary friend named Jake. We knew he was an imaginary friend because no one in the neighborhood had a child named Jake. It wasn't unusual for kids to have imaginary friends, but Luke was 8, not exactly the age where you'd still expect that sort of thing. Christy thought it was cute and innocent, but I was a little more skeptical. It seemed odd to me since Luke hadn't been the type of kid to make imaginary friends. Regardless, I didn't think much of it because he was only 8 years old. It started to get a little more concerning when Christy and I realized that Luke was starting to spend more and more time up there, which struck me as strange. What was even stranger was that he wasn't bringing toys up there. As far as I could tell, he only had his imagination to play with. It's not like he had a game console or anything to keep him entertained, and I had been very clear about not carrying anything up there alone as it was dangerous, and I didn't want him to fall. At one point, my curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to ask him about it. Luke acted extremely weird when I asked him about his friend and said that Jake was shy and didn't like being talked about. When I asked him why he was spending so much time up there, he told me that Jake only liked to play in the treehouse and that he didn't like coming inside. I honestly didn't know what to say. It seemed like a pretty bizarre condition. Weren't imaginary friends supposed to be available wherever and whenever you needed them? I did some research later that day and found out that some kids only play with their imaginary friends in certain rooms of their house. So as weird as it was, I accepted it. Christy was pretty uneasy though. She thought Luke was taking this imaginary friend thing too far, and I honestly agreed. We weren't helicopter parents though when it came to our kids. We let them spend their free time however they wanted to, as long as they were doing well in school and completing their chores. Most weekends, we'd let Luke play with the neighborhood kids until the sun went down. They'd ride bikes, play tag, and usual stuff. They were all good kids, and we trusted Luke to behave himself and stay out of trouble. He wasn't the type of kid to pick on other kids or get into fights, which was why I was especially concerned when Luke came home one Saturday with a black eye. I cleaned him up and asked him what happened. He looked down at the floor and didn't say anything, but I insisted that he tell me what happened, and I wouldn't be mad at him. What he said next made me shiver. He looked up at me and told me that he had gotten into a fight with Jake. I had to process whose kid Jake was before realizing that he was talking about his imaginary friend. I told him not to lie to me and that he wasn't being funny. Instead of fessing up, Luke just started crying and ran to his room. Christy was convinced he'd gotten into a fight with one of the neighborhood kids and didn't want to admit it. I agreed with that. She wanted me to take down the treehouse right then and there, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. That treehouse had taken weeks of hard work, and the thought of tearing it down didn't sit right with me. I told her that I'd talk with Luke and tell him that he was taking things way too far. Luke refused to come out of his room or talk to me for the rest of the day, so getting something out of him wasn't going to happen. The next day, I decided to investigate. When I climbed up into the treehouse, what I saw made my stomach churn. Scattered around were children's socks and sneakers, all dirty and tattered. I knew for a fact that none of them belonged to Luke. I also knew for a fact that they weren't my older sons either. We had donated all his old shoes a long time ago. That's not all that was up there. There were also food wrappers, bags, utensils, even a couple of dirty plates. Weirdest of all, there were pencil drawings of wild animals on all the walls. There was a fox, a bear, some deer. I don't remember all of them, but I do remember that they were all animals. The one that stood out to me the most was what appeared to be a gigantic spider with a face that was just completely penning over it. It was just downright freaky. I immediately climbed down and asked Luke about the treehouse. He told me that Jake only liked to talk on a full stomach, so we had to bring him food and other snacks. He then told me that the shoes and socks were also Jake's, and that Jake was pretty forgetful in general. That was it. From that moment on, I forbade Luke from going into the treehouse. I knew he was still lying to me, and I wanted to punish him until he admitted to it. I was 100% sure that Luke had found those things around the neighborhood and was making up stories to cover it up. Christy was worried about Luke's mental health, and I was too. We thought about consulting a professional should things continue, but one evening I saw something that changed everything. I was looking out the bedroom window when I spotted movement near the treehouse. At first, I was livid that Luke was disobeying me, but then I realized what I was looking at. A sickly, frail-looking child was climbing down the treehouse steps. It wasn't Luke. He didn't look like any of the kids from the neighborhood either. His clothes were dirty, and he moved like he hadn't eaten in days. I ran outside yelling for that kid to stop. As soon as I opened the back door, the boy darted into the woods. I chased after him, but he was freakishly fast. Within seconds, he disappeared into the trees. Christy called every parent in the neighborhood, but all their kids were accounted for. We called the police, who searched the woods thoroughly for over an hour but found nothing. No missing children had been reported in the area either. The whole thing was beyond explanation. With my consent, the police questioned my son about that kid, and what he told them was horrifying. Apparently, Jake claimed to be a magic boy who lived in the woods with his other friends. His friends were supposedly all animals, as he called them: bear, fox, and names like that. Every time Jake would come to visit my son, he'd beg him to leave his family behind and join him in the woods with the rest of his friends. He'd then get mad when Luke would refuse and make these strange noises. I don't know why Luke never told me any of it, and there was a part of me that felt responsible for putting him in danger like that. The police conducted a full search of the woods but never found a thing. We never saw Jake again after that. This happened a few weeks ago, so it's still fresh in my mind. I live in a quiet suburb in Delaware, but I'm a sophomore in college out in California. This happened during fall break in October when I was back home for a few days. I come home every chance I can, which honestly always feels a little bittersweet. I love seeing my parents, but they're really traditional, which can be suffocating. One of the things that drives me crazy is how uptight they are about weed, even though it's recently been legalized here. They lose their minds if they knew I smoked. They've never really gotten used to the idea that I'm an adult now. I can't really understand their position on the whole thing, but at the end of the day, they are my parents, and I would never disrespect them, especially while I'm under their roof. Whenever I'm home, I have to sneak around to avoid getting caught. I hate to admit it, but sneaking around my parents is a skill I've mastered over the years. I can't even count the number of times I've snuck out of the house late at night, let alone all the other mischievous things I used to do. My dad has the nose of a bloodhound, so smoking inside isn't an option. Thankfully, my old treehouse is still standing in the front yard. My parents built it for me when I was a kid, and even though it's weathered and creaky in some spots, it's held up surprisingly well. It's high enough in the trees that it's basically hidden from view, especially from the house. From up there, I can see everything: the yard, the street, some windows of the house, but no one can see me unless they know exactly where to look. When I was younger, that treehouse was the place I went when I needed to escape, which, if you knew what I was like as a child, was relatively often. It's honestly kind of hard to talk about with all the old memories flooding back, but I'll get to the point. On the Saturday before I was supposed to fly back to school, my parents were out at some banquet or something that was going to run late into the evening. I knew they wouldn't be home for hours, but I didn't know exactly when they'd be returning. I didn't want to risk getting caught in the backyard, so I climbed up into the treehouse with my stash just to be safe. It was chilly out, and I could see my own breath in the air. I have this theory that cold weather induces more nostalgia, but that might just be me. It was quiet and peaceful up there, and it was nice being the only one around. I've always liked being up high too, so that definitely added to the experience. I watched the sunset as I thought about school, excited to go back. By the time I finished, it was mostly dark outside, meaning I had timed things just right. That's when I noticed it. As I was panning my eyes across the yard, a light turned on in the house. I froze, knowing I was the only one home. My heart started racing as I stared at the window, feeling that instinctual sense of fear that only arises from true danger. My vision began closing in around that single source of light as if it were drawing me in. A few moments later, movement in the backyard snapped me out of my dissociative state. 3 hooded figures were circling the property, clearly trying to move quickly. My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. I watched as the 3 figures moved to the front steps. That's when a 4th figure opened the door and let them in. My chest tightened as it hit me. My house was being robbed. I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't look away. Part of me was still frozen, and another part of me was still trying to convince myself that what I was seeing was real. That's the best way I can explain what I was feeling in that moment. One of the figures stayed outside pacing the yard. I think some subconscious part of me clicked because I looked down and my phone was in my hand, open to the keypad on my phone app. Without thinking, I dialed 911 and whispered into the phone, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I told the operator what was happening and hung up. But as I was putting my phone away, the light from the screen must have caught the guy's eye because he whipped his head to look up into the trees. I ducked, but I was worried he had seen me. Not 3 seconds later, I got my answer. I heard a voice yell out, "Hey!" clearly directed at me. I peeked around one of the wooden floor pieces and saw a dark figure walking towards the base of the tree. He knew where I was. I was sure of it. He got to the base of the tree and started climbing the wooden planks that led up to the treehouse. I screamed that police were on their way, hoping to scare him off, but he didn't stop. He just kept climbing, his hands gripping the planks like he was determined to get to me. Without thinking, I grabbed my bong, the only thing within reach, and threw it as hard as I could. It hit him in the head and shattered into a million pieces, and he let out a loud curse before falling to the ground. He wasn't very high up, but it was enough to make him reconsider. Instead of climbing back up again, he ran back towards the house and shouted at the other guys who were still inside. The next thing I saw was all four of them running to my backyard, where they presumably entered and exited from. My heart was still beating like crazy. Not even 3 minutes later, the police arrived. I was shaking so badly as I climbed down from the treehouse that I thought I was going to fall. I tried to tell them what had happened, but my words were a mess. I told them that I hadn't seen a getaway car and that I didn't get a good look at any of their faces. My parents pulled in not long after that. They were really sympathetic about the whole thing, which I was grateful for. The police told us that the robbers must have known my parents would be out that night. It seemed like a planned job, but what they didn't plan for was me being there. I still don't know how to feel about it. I especially don't want to think about what would have happened had that guy gotten all the way up to the treehouse. I'm back at school now, but if I'm being honest, I haven't had a good night's sleep since this incident. I'm terrified those people might come back, and I'm even more terrified that my parents are there all alone. I'm worried sick about their safety, and I just hope that's the last we ever hear of them. I hope I never have to give an update, but I will if God forbid something comes. When I was a kid, I had a very nightmarish experience at my childhood home. My family moved to this house when I was 4, so I really don't remember anything of the house we lived in when I was born. We lived in what I call my childhood house from when I was 4 to when I was 14, so exactly 10 years. I love that house. I have very good memories from growing up there. We moved out of state when I was just beginning high school, which was a nightmare in itself, but that's nothing to do with this story. In the backyard of my childhood home was a treehouse. It was built by the previous owner for his kids. Believe it or not, when my parents viewed the house, a major selling point was the kid-friendly nature of the house and the backyard for my older brother and me. My brother Kyle is 2 years older than me, so he was 6 when they bought the house, and my brother and I apparently were very excited over the treehouse aspect in the backyard. According to my parents, my brother and I would play in the treehouse with friends we'd made over the years. But as the years passed, I would stop playing in the treehouse like that. At a certain age, by the age of 12, I was obviously not playing in the treehouse anymore, but I was admittedly a troublemaker around this age, and I would often get in trouble with my parents. I'd get grounded often, and in general, I'd just throw a lot of temper tantrums, and there would be a lot of yelling in the house. One weekend, my dad grounded me for a repeat complaint from my guidance counselor about my behavior and grades in school, and like an angsty, annoying preteen, I thought I hated my parents at that moment. That night, I refused to sleep in the house. I took a couple blankets and pillows and went outside to the treehouse to sleep up there. It wasn't the first time I'd done this, and my parents would know about it when I do it. They didn't care. It was my little way of rebelling. Little did my dad know that I had my Nintendo DS with me. Even though I wasn't allowed to play video games or watch TV, I played Animal Crossing for literally hours before getting tired and eventually going to sleep. But I think I was only asleep for a few moments. I don't think I even entered REM sleep yet when I woke up to a voice from outside calling my name. Tommy, Tommy. I was still confused as I was waking back up. It could have been my dad's voice. Tommy, are you up there? The voice said. All I remember is it being a deep, grown man's voice. I didn't reply. My heart started to race for some reason. I heard the steps of the ladder squeaking as someone was coming up. And then, in the near pitch-black darkness, I saw someone poke their head through the opening in the floor. I couldn't see their face. I just saw the shadow of the outline of their head. He said, "Ah, there you are." I replied, "Dad?" But this was where he stopped responding entirely for about 20 seconds. I stared at this head that I presumed was staring back at me. I was waiting for my eyes to readjust to the darkness, but something told me that that wasn't my dad. I stood up and went to the window of the treehouse and started screaming, "Dad!" as loud as I could. I saw the light in my parents' room turn on, and I also heard footsteps hurrying down the ladder to the treehouse. Moments later, my parents burst outside through the back door, and my dad swore to me that he wasn't out there playing a prank on me. My parents believed me. It wasn't like some stupid horror movie where the parents don't believe a word the kid says. My uncle was still an active cop at the time, so my dad called him for advice, and my uncle made a report on the incident the next day. Not much information I could give, besides I heard a deep man's voice and saw the outline of his head and that he knew my name. Not much the police could work with. Obviously, I never spent a night in the treehouse again. My dad for a while thought it was one of the neighbors directly across from us, but he could never prove it. For years, whenever I'd see him outside and he'd say hi to me, I'd try to think back to the voice from that night, but I just couldn't remember it clearly enough to make a comparison. It still remains a very unsettling mystery in the back of my mind.
It was a rainy night, and I was driving home from my shift at the late-night diner I work at. It was a quiet shift at work, but I had a weird amount of energy still, so I knew I was going to have to pop a melatonin when I got home. I was driving my usual route, a scenic road during the day but majorly dark at night, lacking many light posts. There's the occasional little parking lot with cute little strips of stores or family-owned restaurants and shops, and then just stretches of nothingness. By nothingness, I mean forest. I was passing one of the aforementioned parking lots of a well-known deli, and under a light post was a woman standing out in the rain with her arm held out. She was waving me down. I slowed as I realized it was a slightly older woman who appeared to be in her mid-50s maybe. This woman was really tall, like 5'11" or 6 feet, but very skinny. I lowered my window and yelled, "Do you need a ride?" She came over to the front door and opened it, chanting how much of a hero I was. I asked where she was heading, and she said, "Just up the road to town." She was soaking wet, getting my car all wet, but I like to think of myself as a good person, and I couldn't in good conscience leave another woman out there in the cold rain. However, picking up a random man, on the other hand, would be a different story. The woman seemed sweet, but I noticed, as I looked at her while talking to her, that she was missing a few teeth. Very, very off-putting. I had to now wonder if she was homeless. She didn't smell or look like a homeless person, though, but the rain soaking her and her clothes could have been masking any sense temporarily. Plus, her hair was so wet that what may have usually been scraggly, undone hair could now have been weighted down and straightened by the water. Either way, the woman was smiling the whole time and didn't seem like a threat. We pulled up to an intersection with a gas station on one corner. I pulled in next to a pump. Might as well fill up. I asked her if she wanted anything from inside. I was really doing my good deed for the week. She said, "No, thanks, honey." So I went inside to pay the attendant for gas and some spiked seltzers since tomorrow was the weekend. When I got back to my car, the woman was gone. I looked around the gas station lot real quick, but it was tiny. She was gone. She must have run off somewhere. I felt slightly bad, feeling like she was some lost, helpless woman, but part of me also felt slightly relieved. I filled up the tank of my SUV, and I was on my way home. When I got back to the house, I went straight inside my apartment, which is the first level of a 2-family house. There's a tenant upstairs and me. The front door into the foyer was usually left unlocked. Then the 2 doors leading to each apartment were locked. I let myself in, out of the rain, and into my apartment. I set the seltzers down on the counter. I wasn't that tired yet, so I took a melatonin and tried to go to bed. Even with the melatonin, though, I was having a hard time sleeping that night. My mind was kind of going wild with thoughts. A lot of thinking about that woman I picked up earlier and what happened to her. At certain points, I heard slight sounds from outside of my bedroom, but I dismissed them as sounds from the upstairs tenant. Boy, do I wish I was more suspicious before falling asleep. I woke up in my dark bedroom, something that usually would never happen when I take a melatonin. I usually sleep like a baby through the night. I sat up feeling drowsy, feeling really thirsty too. I reached over to the table next to my bed for my water, and then I saw and heard something across the room from me. I saw someone crouched in the corner of my bedroom behind a clothing dresser with their legs folded. I had to be hallucinating it. I shook my head violently and made weird noises. I even slapped myself in the face. And now, whoever was in the corner stood up and walked out of the room. I didn't scream. I didn't say a word. I sat in my bed in literal shock. The part that had me questioning my sanity for a bit after the figure was gone was that there wasn't a single sound from outside the room after this. No footsteps, not the sound of a door closing. I grabbed my phone and called my dad. He picked up, confused why I was calling so late. I told him what I just saw, and he said, "Trish, you probably just had a night terror." I stayed on the phone with him as I was continuing to become more awake, and I left my room and turned on the lights to the living room outside. It was a small space. There was no one in there. I looked around the entire space and could confirm no one was there. I started to believe that maybe I did just hallucinate it. But still, I slept with the bedroom door locked that night. When I woke up in the morning, I drank some coffee and got dressed for the gym. I went to open the door to the foyer and realized it was already unlocked. My heart sank. Last night, what I saw, was it real? I did another look around the apartment. Confirming no one was inside, I went out to my car and opened the back door to put my gym bag in the back seat, and that's when I noticed the damp, yellow-brownish stains all over the floor in the back, and my blanket that I always had back there was gone. I wanted to cry or scream. I figured it out. That woman snuck into the back seat last night when I was in the gas station. She either somehow unlocked the door to my apartment or I mistakenly left it unlocked. I called my dad again, frantically asking him what to do. He said, "Check and make sure nothing was stolen, and if nothing was, then calling the police really wouldn't do anything." I checked the house and didn't find anything to be missing, just my blanket from the car. I skipped the gym that day. In fact, I stayed bottled up in my apartment for a while after that. I was just genuinely disturbed. I didn't want to live there for much longer after that. And so, after that month, I found a new place to live. This happened a few months ago, and I don't know why I agreed. But I decided to go with my friend Michael to a house party he was attending during our first year of high school, even though I wasn't even invited. Michael was able to pull some strings, and I accepted the invitation. Knowing that I wouldn't be able to drive, I made the choice to go with Michael. When we arrived at the home late at night, Michael told me to leave my phone in the car. He explained that maybe I could lose it, or someone I didn't know could try and take it from me while I wasn't looking. At first I was confused, but I simply nodded, and we got out of the car. I went with Michael into the home or backyard where the party was taking place. I glanced around the backyard and saw people engaging in various activities such as smoking, drinking, and possibly even doing drugs in small groups. Michael had encouraged me to go mingle and say hello to a few people. After a few hours, I realized I had way too much to drink because my vision was completely foggy. After getting closer to the house, I leaned against the wall to support myself. As I did so, I noticed the time on my watch indicated that it was either midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. I knew it was time to leave, so I set out to find Michael. Despite my overwhelming need to collapse, I scanned the yard for him, but I was unable to locate him. When I asked a few others if they'd seen Michael, they all said they had not. I decided to call Michael to find out where he was, so I reached inside my pocket to feel for my phone, but it wasn't there. I cursed myself in the back of my mind because I realized that I had left my phone in Michael's car, which had disappeared with him. I realized there was only one way to get home: walking. I remembered my house wasn't too far from this one, but the night was chilly because it was fall. I thought about just asking someone else to take me home, but I didn't know anyone else who could help. So I stuck with my idea of walking home in the darkness by myself. I then got to the road and started stumbling down the street. I knew I had too many drinks because I felt lightheaded and dizzy. A few minutes later, I made it to the main area of the street and kept walking. I lazily started thinking about a bunch of different things, like why Michael decided to leave me alone at the party, or why I decided to listen to Michael's idiotic idea of leaving my phone in his car so I couldn't call him or anyone else. I started cursing myself for being so careless with my drinking and even getting drunk, knowing I shouldn't have done that. I stopped walking on the side of the road because I was getting tired. I crossed my arms over my chest tightly to keep myself warm. Then I remembered something I could do, which was hitchhiking. I held out my arm and stuck out my thumb, hoping someone would see me. I watched as a couple of cars drove past me. They wouldn't stop, and as minutes ticked by, I started feeling uneasy, thinking I would have to start walking again. It was past 1 in the morning, and there were a few cars driving past me, but no one was stopping, either because they didn't notice me or didn't care. I hesitated and thought about walking home again, but I realized that in my drunken state, it would be too daunting. I was still holding out my thumb when a gray truck pulled up and stopped in front of me. I smiled as I stumbled towards the vehicle. The window rolled down, and an older-looking man with a beard asked me if I needed a ride. I told him yes, and then told him where my house was before getting into the truck, feeling grateful for the ride. As we started driving down the road, the man started trying to make small talk with me, asking what happened to me. However, I was too disoriented to have an actual conversation with him, and the only things I could manage to say were low mumbles or just murmurs and groans. As we turned the corner to my street, away from the party, I started feeling uneasy. For some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was strange about this man. Suddenly, we drove past my house. I told the man that we had just driven past it, and I felt my gut telling me to get out. But I couldn't because I was too drunk to move. I was about to tell the man to let me out before we got too far away from my house when suddenly the man turned to me, and I noticed he had a sinister look on his face. "You know you shouldn't be drunk while you're hitchhiking because you'd make a very easy target," the man said, smirking darkly. The man reached over and started rubbing my leg. I didn't know what he was trying to do, but I knew it probably wasn't anything good. Before he could do anything else to me, We both heard a loud siren behind the car, and then a flashing red and blue light flooded the night. I realized it was the police, and I jumped for joy inside. The man panicked and stopped, unlocking the doors, which allowed me to jump out of the car. I ran as fast as I could, and the police officer rushed over to me. I told him the entire story about what happened to me. Unfortunately, nothing illegal had happened per se at that point. The police officer told me that he was looking for someone in a gray truck who had apparently stolen something from a store. I'm not sure if it was the man who picked me up or someone else, but I was just glad the police officer stopped the car. The cop gave me a ride home, and I decided from there on I wouldn't get so drunk that I couldn't think straight. I now know the importance of being responsible and staying aware of my surroundings, even when having a good time. I was still in college when this happened. I went to a big party school in upstate New York. I wasn't in a sorority, but I attended a lot of the frat parties. I had a heavy drinking phase in college, unfortunately, but I guess it's good that I got it out of my system. There was an upcoming frat party that my friends Deanna and Kayla wanted to go to. I was not one to ever say no to a party unless I was already deathly hungover, and even then, I'd sometimes still go out. I was living in a house off campus with 3 other girls. We were not a sorority house or team house or anything like that. Just 4 friends renting a house together. I believe it was a Kappa Sigma party that we were going to. The house was about 20 minutes away from campus. We pre-gamed pretty heavily at our house and then called an Uber, which we all split. On the Uber ride there, we pre-gamed some more, which was a recipe for disaster. By the time we showed up to the party, I was borderline blacked out. I just barely remember the layout of that house. I'd never been to a Kappa Sigma party besides that night. It's weird. I have short spans of memory from that night. I vaguely remember the outside, that there were a bunch of frat guys standing out front of the house. Then I remember the DJ in the living room and the 2 beer pong tables in the kitchen. I was later told that I played beer pong with some random frat guy and ended up talking to him in a corner for a big chunk of the night. But after that, nobody knows where I went. I couldn't even tell you the last thing I remember before waking up sleeping on the grass on the side of the road in a daze. My head was throbbing. I had to still be somewhat intoxicated. It was pitch black outside. I was laying by a bunch of trees in a wooded area. Apart from the university, there wasn't much up there besides woods and the occasional little town. There were a couple of light posts further down the road, so I wasn't just laying in complete darkness. I patted down my pockets looking for my phone and had a meltdown when I realized my pockets were empty. I was also missing my cross-body bag. I had absolutely nothing on me. I started to freak out. I couldn't even call for help, let alone check the time or where I was. I looked around the immediate area by where I was sleeping. Nothing. My white shirt was stained with dirt, but that was the least of my worries. I started walking down the road closer to the light posts. I was starting to realize there were no buildings in sight. I was on some completely random back road. I leaned on the light pole for a few minutes, wondering what to do. I decided I'd wait for someone to pass by and ask for help. It took a long time, though, at least 15 minutes before I noticed headlights down the road. I stepped out onto the road, waving my arms and jumping, trying to ensure I got their attention. The car slowed to a stop on the side of the road. I approached the car and the guy inside rolled down the window. Once he asked me if I was all right. I told him I was stranded without a phone and needed a ride home. He told me to get in, and I did, making sure to let him know how much I appreciated it. He, of course, asked me about my predicament, how I found myself stranded on the side of the road. I told him I was at a party, and the next thing I remembered was waking up on the side of the road. In hindsight, I should not have said any of that. I should have been as vague as possible, not let this guy know that I got completely trashed and was vulnerable. He asked why I didn't call for help, and I told him I lost my cell phone too. The guy looked at me like I was stupid. I looked back at him for a second, and this was the first time I really analyzed his features. He was like 35. He wasn't the best-looking guy. He had a thin goatee and a big nose. I gave him my address to put into his GPS. As he drove, he put the address in and then said under his breath, "Okay, here we go." I asked how far away we were, and he said about 20 minutes. That sounded about right since the frat house was about 20 minutes from our house. I thought things would go smoothly. I'd get dropped off at the house where Kayla and Deanna would be waiting for me with my belongings. But nothing can ever go that smoothly. The man spoke in a gentle voice basically the entire time, asking basic questions at first. His soft voice was, in a weird way, off-putting. Like, why was he talking in an almost whisper? In the car, we drove on and on for what seemed like over 20 minutes on the same road. I started to get concerned, so I asked him how much further we had. He didn't respond right away, so I said, "Sir?" He went, "Hmm?" And I repeated my question. He said in his soft voice, "Not far." This wasn't right. Our house is in town, yet we were still on the same back road, with nothing but trees everywhere. I started noticing in my peripheral vision that he would look at me multiple times, like he'd move his whole head to stare at me for a few seconds and then look back at the road. I was starting to feel sick. I asked him if he put the right address in, and he said yes. Then he said, "What color underwear are you wearing?" As he put his hand on my knee and started rubbing my knee. I moved it away and told him in a desperate voice to please not hurt me. I just wanted to get home safe. He said, "Why would I hurt you?" After saying this, he pulled onto the grass on the side of the road and put the car in park. He was about to lean over toward me and do something, like put his arms around me, but I didn't let him. I opened the door and ran into the woods. Luckily, I was wearing my Air Forces, so I didn't have a hard time running in the woods. I ran only just enough to be out of sight from the car. When I could no longer see its headlights, I heard the man, for the first time, raising his voice, and he yelled into the woods, "Where you at?" I just want to explicit. I put my hands over my mouth, not only to muffle my breathing, but because of pure fear. I waited and waited until I heard a car door slam shut and the sound of a car speeding off. I waited a few more moments before walking back to the road, confirming he was gone. I felt truly helpless. I didn't want to run into that man again, but I also needed someone else to help me. I waited just at the edge of the woods for another car to come, and eventually one did. I saw the headlights approaching from afar, but I waited until I was sure it was a different car before jumping out, waving my arms and yelling. The car came to a stop. It was another man, this guy a little older. I sat in the back seat this time. I was so shaken up that I hardly spoke, apart from answering whatever questions about my predicament he asked. Thankfully, this man dropped me off at the house. It was like 4 a.m. at this point. My friends were still awake waiting for me. They had my phone and my bag. They were contemplating calling the police if I didn't come back by morning. No one had any clue who I left with or how I ended up on the side of the road. The boy who I was with claimed he wasn't the one to leave with me. In fact, there's no solid proof that I even left with anyone. But that leaves no explanation for how I ended up sleeping on the side of the road. I cut back heavily on the drinking after this night, and I never want to be in a situation again where I have to hitchhike. Out of the dark forest, I was hitchhiking from Germany to Paris. He was a Frenchman, a somewhat dirty and unshaven driver, small and shabby. He agreed to give me a ride in his car to Paris, where I needed to pick up my paintings from an exhibition. It was October. I was 29 years old, and he seemed about the same age. He spoke broken English. I spoke no French at all. I really didn't have a clue who this guy was. The day was mild, sunny, and blue, a warm and comfortable French day, a great day to hitchhike. It was around 4:30 p.m. when I met him at a gas station somewhere in France. I hopped into his little old car, happy to have scored a ride. We drove off to Paris on the main highway. After some small talk, mainly about where I'm from, he reached over my lap and opened the glove compartment. He pulled out what looked like a bunch of passports. They were passports. He handed me all four. The first, he said, belonged to his girlfriend, who had died falling off the back of his motorcycle. The second, his girlfriend, who died in a car crash. The third, a girlfriend who died from a brain tumor. And the fourth, she fell off a horse. "I'm such an unlucky man," he said. I agreed he was unlucky. The uneasiness started then and only grew as the miles rolled on. He was in possession of 4 young women's passports. Soon after showing me the passports, the man said he wanted to take a shortcut to Paris. It wasn't really a question. Excellent, I thought. Get me out of here ASAP. I assumed we would cut through some charming French villages on secondary roads, past houses and farms. But no. Instead, we turned off onto an implausible dirt road off the main highway. Uh-oh, I thought. Not good. But I kept silent. Why we keep quiet is a mystery. Perhaps because of our dumb manners. At first, the road was out in the open through a field. We rolled over the typically vivid green French hillside until we finally reached the oncoming heavy woods. The road narrowed. It grew instantly darker as we entered the forest road. The interior of the forest was creepy. The woods looked like the perfect place to hide something. I still found the woods beautiful, beautiful and dreadful. It was at this point that my French driver shouted in broken English, "I don't want to speak English anymore." This was definitely not a request. Then silence, uncomfortable silence in the darkening forest. I started to feel a small trickle of adrenaline in my body. My fight-or-flight instinct was warming up. Communication had now officially ended. Just silence. I pondered this because I knew I would surely have questions as we got deeper and deeper into the thickening woods. I knew, though, that I wouldn't ask anything. Nothing. It was now 5 p.m., and the sun was fading fast. The woods grew darker. The driver seemed tense, and I could tell he was in deep thought. I noticed his lips moving almost imperceptibly, rigid, snake-like. I myself had moved my hand to the car door handle, a movement I'm sure could not have been missed. The car was slowing down. He did not say a word. Was I going to die now? Did he have a gun? All these questions ran through my head. My life was now surreal. This was not my plan. Maybe I communicated with my captor in some secret way. Maybe I gave off some kind of male threat, perceptible only to men facing off. I possessed my own rage issues, and I was not going down without a fight. That I knew. There would be no begging or cries for mercy from me, not to this guy. I also had my own secret storeroom of crazy. I was big and strong at that time, road tough through my travels. And there's no substitute for my nothing-to-lose stare. That's all I gave him. Something very primitive transpired between us then, I think rather quickly, in a matter of seconds. It's a sort of inner calculus as to whether one can overcome, stop, or kill the other guy or not, and all its peripheral considerations, not the least blood, gore, strength, and, alas, dying. I don't think these calculations are the same when the victim is small and scared, begging, and weak. I think between those two uneven people, it just becomes bloodlust, power, panic, scratching, and doom. The car was now moving really, really slow. I entered a very strange and new place in myself. I was transformed with very little preparation into a potential killer myself. Maybe my chauffeur could read my mind or my body language or sense my intent or see my hand on his dirty door handle. It was the moment of truth. And then we suddenly started to speed up. Thank God. Out of those woods. The road began to widen, and we emerged out of the dark forest into the setting sun, dark red and orange in the sky. I could hear and then see the highway now. I saw tiny houses across the highway. I had no idea where exactly I was. The Frenchman asked me if I wanted to spend the night at his house. We could eat dinner together, he said. A quick film of his filthy torture chamber basement ran through my head. I politely said, no. My first word spoken since the order not to speak English. I sincerely think that if I had broken that command and blabbered something in the woods, my story might have had a different ending. It all came down to silence. I can be silent. Sometimes one needs to be to contemplate the next move. Maybe one of the faces in the passports may not have been able to spring over her nature and started to talk or beg with fear. Would that have fed the killer's darkness as evil? Who really knows? I got out at the side of the highway and, with night settling in, watched him drive away. I never went to the police because I didn't speak French and thought maybe my imagination was just too damn active. I yelled something into the night sky, just wondering what the hell had just happened. It was fully dark now. I was exhausted after that little adventure and soon fell asleep on the side of the highway. The next morning, I was worried what the new day would bring. I looked at my hands. Am I still alive? Jump ahead 20 years. I'm teaching a German business student English in a cafe in Leipzig, Germany. For whatever reason, we discuss this topic, hitchhiking, and I tell him my story. My student promptly whips out his smartphone and Googles French serial killers. Then he shows me pictures. There he was. I was shown a photo of serial killer Patrice Allegre. It was him, all those years ago. Me and him on that strange ride. I had never forgotten his face. At that time, in 1990, there was a reported serial killer leaving bodies of girls on French roadsides and highways. He was in the midst of his killing hobby back then. I had heard about a killer on the loose. My French girlfriend told me to be careful hitchhiking back then. I've often wondered if the murdered women and other men may have been buried in those woods we passed through slowly. I now wish I had gone to the police and have since subsequently tried. He's in jail, and they're not interested. Maybe I could have helped stop more murders back then. That's heavy on my soul. And since then, I've felt the dark light in my body. Maybe the souls of the girls escaped with me, desperate to get out of the forest. There's something wrong with the empty tent we found in the Cascades. The silence inside isn't natural. I've been camping my whole life, but I've never heard silence like that before. Not the peaceful quiet of nature or the dead of night. I mean true, absolute silence, the kind that makes you question if you still exist. That's what we found in that tent, and I wish to God we'd never unzipped it in the first place. My girlfriend Mia and I had been planning this hiking trip for months. She's the adventurous one, always pushing me to try new trails and explore off the beaten path. I prefer sticking to marked routes, but she has this way of making everything sound exciting. "Come on, James," she'd say, her green eyes lighting up. "Where's your sense of adventure?" That was before we found the tent. Now, I never want to see another campsite again. We were 3 days into our trek through the Cascade Mountains when we spotted it. The weather had turned nasty, with a heavy mist clinging to the trees and making everything look slightly wrong, like a photo that's just a little out of focus. Mia spotted the blue tent first, pitched perfectly in a small clearing about 50 yards off the trail. "Hey, check that out," she called, already veering off the path. "Maybe they have some extra coffee we can beg for. I'm dying for a cup that isn't instant." I followed reluctantly, noting how the tent looked almost too perfect. No sagging fabric, no mud splatter despite the wet weather. Just pristine blue nylon gleaming through the mist. "I don't see anyone around," I said, scanning the clearing. No backpacks, no cooking equipment, no signs of life at all. Mia reached the tent first and called out a hello. No response. She unzipped the entrance and poked her head inside. "Hello? Hello? Anyone home?" The words came out strange, or rather, they didn't come out at all. Her mouth moved, but the sound just vanished. She pulled back, startled. "Did you hear that?" Or, "Not hear that, I guess?" I stepped forward and stuck my hand through the tent entrance, snapping my fingers. Nothing. Not even the muffled sound you get when snapping underwater. Just complete, absolute silence. Against my better judgment, we both crawled inside. The interior was ordinary enough. Sleeping bag, pillow, even a paperback book lying open face down. But every movement we made was swallowed by that impossible silence. I could feel my heart pounding, but couldn't hear it. Mia mouthed something to me, and I shook my head, pointing to my ears. The silence felt like a physical presence pressing against my eardrums. We got out of there fast. Mia wanted to set up our tent nearby. "Safety in numbers," she argued. I wanted to hike on, but the light was failing, and the mist had thickened into a proper fog. Reluctantly, I agreed to camp in the clearing, but insisted on positioning our tent so we could see the blue one from our entrance. At night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of Mia's steady breathing beside me was reassuring, normal, but I kept straining to hear anything from the other tent. Around 3 a.m., I heard it, a rustling sound like someone moving around inside fabric. I shook Mia awake, and we both listened. The sound came again, definitely from the blue tent. Mia grabbed our flashlight before I could stop her. "We have to check," she whispered. "What if someone's in trouble?" The beam of our flashlight cut through the fog as we approached. The rustling had stopped. Mia's hand trembled as she reached for the zipper. Inside, empty, just like before. We searched the whole tent, but there was no sign anyone had been there. That's when Mia gasped. I followed her gaze to our left, where another tent had appeared, identical to the first. Same pristine blue nylon, same perfect pitch. But something was wrong. Wrong with its shape, like the geometry wasn't quite right. Mia moved toward it. I grabbed her arm. "Don't." "We have to know," she said, using that same tone she always did when convincing me to take risks. She pulled away and approached the new tent. The zipper sounded impossibly loud in the night air as the entrance opened. I saw nothing. Not darkness, not emptiness, but nothing. It was like looking into a void that shouldn't exist, a hole in reality itself. And it was spreading, the edges of the tent opening seeming to widen impossibly. Mia stood transfixed. I saw her mouth move, forming words I couldn't hear. Then she took a step forward. I lunged for her, grabbing her jacket just as she began to lean into that impossible darkness. For a moment, we struggled at the edge of the void, me pulling back, her drawn forward by something I couldn't see. Then she blinked, like waking from a trance, and we both scrambled backward. We ran, left everything except what we were wearing, ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave out, following the trail by moonlight until we reached the ranger station at dawn. They never found our equipment or the blue tent or its impossible twin. The clearing itself seemed to have vanished. The ranger said there was no such spot where we described it. Mia doesn't go hiking anymore. She says she's lost her sense of adventure. But sometimes I can't help but wonder what would have happened if we'd entered deeper into that tent. If you're camping and smell something like rotting fruit mixed with candy, do not investigate. I should have known something was wrong when Maya's nosebleed wouldn't stop. We'd been camping for just 2 nights when it started, but none of us connected it to that sickeningly sweet smell that had been hanging around our campsite. You know how it is when you're out in the woods. Everything has its own weird scent, and after a while, you just stop questioning it. God, I wish we had questioned it sooner. There were 5 of us on this trip. Me, my boyfriend Derek, his sister Maya, our friend Chris, who organized the whole thing, and Chris's new girlfriend Jen, who none of us really knew that well. We'd planned this getaway for months, wanting to escape the summer heat in the city and explore some of the more remote trails in Blackwood Forest. Chris had found this spot online, far enough from the marked trails that we'd have total privacy, but still technically within the park boundaries. At least that's what he claimed. The first day was perfect. We set up our 3 tents in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, the kind that block out most of the sunlight even at noon. Derek and I took the blue tent. Maya had her own small one, and Chris shared his with Jen. We spent the afternoon hiking and gathering firewood, and that evening we sat around the campfire trading stories and passing around a bottle of whiskey Chris had brought. That's when I first noticed the smell. It was faint, like overripe fruit left in the sun too long, but with an underlying sweetness that reminded me of cotton candy. Maya mentioned it too, but Chris brushed it off, saying it was probably just some wild berry bushes nearby. Jen agreed, though something in her expression made me wonder if she was just trying to impress Chris. The second day, the smell was stronger, And that's when the weird stuff started happening. Maya woke up with dried blood crusted around her nostrils, and Derek complained about an itchy rash on his arms. I noticed similar red patches starting to form on my neck. We blamed it on mosquitoes, on allergies, on anything that made sense. Normal explanations for normal problems, right? But then Jen started acting strange. She kept wandering off from the group, always in the same direction toward a dense patch of undergrowth about 50 yards from our campsite. When she'd come back, she'd have dirt under her fingernails and this vacant look in her eyes. Chris tried to joke about it, saying she was probably just looking for a private spot to pee, but I caught him watching her with growing concern. On the third night, the smell became unbearable. It was like someone had dumped a gallon of perfume mixed with rotting meat all over our campsite. None of us could sleep. Around midnight, we heard Jen leave her tent. Through the mesh window of ours, Derek and I watched her walk into the woods with jerky, puppet-like movements. Chris followed her this time. They came running back 20 minutes later, Chris shouting for us to pack up now. But it was too late. We could all hear them now, footsteps circling our campsite, twigs snapping in patterns too deliberate to be animals. And that smell, it was everywhere, filling our lungs, making us gag. Maya was the one who finally spotted it, a patch of disturbed earth where Jen had been digging. Her hands trembling, she pointed her flashlight at the ground, and we saw pale fingers poking through the soil. Chris started digging frantically, and soon we uncovered what was causing the smell. A body. It couldn't have been dead more than a week, wrapped in plastic that had split open in the summer heat. That's when we heard the laugh. High-pitched, delighted, coming from right behind us. We spun around to find Jen standing there, her face split in a wide grin that didn't reach her eyes. "I knew you'd find her eventually," she said, her voice eerily calm. "They always do. The smell makes sure of that." Derek grabbed my arm and whispered, "Run." But as we turned to flee, we saw them. Shadowy figures emerging from between the trees, all wearing the same twisted smile as Jen. The smell was overwhelming now, and I realized with horror that it wasn't coming from the body at all. It was coming from them. I'm writing this from a hospital bed. They found us 2 days later, all except Chris. The doctors can't explain the chemical burns in our nasal passages or the strange patterns the rash left on our skin. They ask me questions about what happened, but I can't tell them the truth. How do you explain that your friend's new girlfriend was part of some cult that uses corpses as bait? That they get off on watching people slowly realize they're being hunted? The police found 6 more bodies buried in that clearing, all recent, all wrapped in the same plastic. They never found Chris or Jen. If you're planning a camping trip and you catch a whiff of something sweet, something that reminds you of cotton candy and rotting fruit, run. Run as fast as you can. And whatever you do, don't look back to see who's smiling at you from between the trees. My friends and I found a strange wax shrine while camping. Now I'm the only one left to warn others. I wish I could blame this all on exhaustion or paranoia, but the waxy residue still under my fingernails proves otherwise. It's been 3 days since I made it out of Mystic Grove Forest, and I still can't shake the smell, that sickly sweet mixture of beeswax and something else. Something that reminds me of rendered fat left too long in the sun. I need to write this down while the details are fresh, while I can still remember Charlotte's face when she realized what we'd done. God, Charlotte, I'm so sorry. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip. 4 friends trying to reconnect after college had pulled us in different directions. Charlotte, my best friend since middle school, had suggested Mystic Grove Forest. She'd always been our group's adventure seeker, the one who pushed us out of our comfort zones. Ben, ever the skeptic, had Googled the location immediately and found all those missing persons reports. He laughed them off as local folklore, but something in those stories caught my attention. They all mentioned a sweet smell, like candles burning in an enclosed space. "Come on, Emma," Charlotte had said, her eyes bright with that familiar spark of mischief. "When's the last time we all did something spontaneous?" She had a point. Between my accounting job, Ben's medical residency, Charlotte's freelance photography, and Jake's startup, we barely had time for group texts anymore. The first day was perfect, almost suspiciously so. We found an ideal camping spot near a small clearing, the kind you see in outdoor magazines. Jake, always the Boy Scout, got our tents up while Ben collected firewood. Charlotte wandered off with her camera, hunting for what she called golden hour magic. I remember feeling so at peace, watching the sunlight filter through the leaves. That should have been my first warning. In horror movies, it's always the perfect days that turn ugly. We found the shrine just before sunset. Charlotte spotted it first, a crude structure about waist high, made entirely of what looked like yellowed wax and hardened fat. The thing was grotesque, with odd lumps and protrusions that almost resembled faces if you looked too long. Around its base, small animal bones had been arranged in patterns that made my eyes hurt if I tried to follow them. That's when the hiker showed up. He was a thin man with weathered skin and eyes that seemed too wide for his face. He didn't introduce himself, just stood at the edge of our camp and stared at the shrine. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "Not near their offering place." Ben, always ready with a smart comment, asked, "On whose offering place?" "The tallow men," the hiker replied, still not looking at us. "They protect the forest. Take what they're owed from those who don't show respect." He told us about them. Waxy figures that moved like stop-motion animation come to life, leaving greasy trails wherever they touched. According to him, they'd been here since before the first settlers, spirits of the forest that had taken on forms mimicking human bodies but made from rendered fat and beeswax. We laughed it off, of course. Jake even took a selfie next to the shrine, making a face. The hiker just shook his head and walked away. Looking back, I wish we'd paid attention to which direction he went. Later that night, when we tried to find the main trail, we realized no one could remember seeing him actually leave. The handprints showed up that first night. I spotted them on my tent while getting ready for bed. Perfect impressions of human hands, but made from something that looked like melted candle wax. They were still warm to the touch. Charlotte wanted to pack up right then, but Ben convinced us it was just some local kids playing pranks. Jake backed him up, suggesting we were letting the hiker's story get to us. Then our supplies started disappearing. First, it was small things. Ben's phone charger, Jake's flashlight, my granola bars. But on the second night, we woke up to find Charlotte's entire backpack gone, along with all our maps. The waxy handprints had multiplied, now forming trails that led into the darker parts of the forest. When we tried to follow them, we kept getting turned around, ending up back at our camp no matter which direction we took. That's when we started seeing them. just glimpses at first. Tall, humanoid figures standing between distant trees. They looked like rough approximations of people, as if someone had tried to mold human shapes out of melted wax, but got all the proportions slightly wrong. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like watching frame-by-frame footage played just a bit too slowly. Jake cracked first. He tried to run for it in the middle of the night, screaming about how they were getting closer. We heard him for about 5 minutes, his voice getting fainter and fainter until it just stopped. Charlotte wanted to look for him, but Ben held her back. "They're hurting us," he said, his voice shaking. I'm not proud of what happened next. We fought about what to do, each of us blaming the others for getting us into this mess. That's when Charlotte noticed the shrine had changed. The wax faces in it were clearer now, and one of them, oh God, one of them looked exactly like Jake. Ben tried to destroy the shrine. Charlotte and I begged him not to, but he wouldn't listen. He kept saying it was just wax, just some sick joke. The moment his boot connected with it, the air filled with that sickly sweet smell, so strong it made us gag. And the figures, they stopped being glimpses. They stepped out into the clearing, their waxy bodies glistening in the moonlight, moving with that horrible stuttering motion. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran. The last thing I heard was Charlotte screaming of Ben's name and a wet sound like candle wax being poured onto stone. I made it out somehow, though the next few hours are a blur. The police didn't believe my story, of course. They're still searching for the others, but I know they won't find them. If you're planning a camping trip to Mystic Grove Forest, please stay away from any shrines you might find, and if you smell something sweet, like beeswax and rendered fat, back off. My sister died in a climbing accident 6 months ago. Last week, I found her skin hanging from a tree. I've been trying to write this down for days, but my hands won't stop shaking. The doctors say writing about it might help, but they don't understand. Every time I close my eyes, I see those empty shells hanging from the branches, gently swaying in the breeze like grotesque wind chimes. The worst part? I keep checking my own skin, running my fingers along the seams, making sure it isn't becoming loose, making sure it still belongs to me. It started 3 weeks ago when I decided to take that solo camping trip to Red Bark State Forest. My therapist had suggested it. Reconnect with nature to process your grief, she said. It had been 6 months since Sheila's accident, and I hadn't been handling it well. My sister was always the adventurous one, always dragging me on hiking trips and outdoor excursions. The irony that a climbing accident took her still haunts me. Maybe that's why I chose to go camping alone. Some misguided attempt to channel her spirit. The first 2 days were actually peaceful. I found a secluded spot near Crystal Lake, far from the marked trails and tourist-friendly campgrounds. Sheila would have loved it. Pristine water, ancient pines, and that profound silence you can only find deep in the wilderness. I spent my time setting up camp, taking photos of interesting fungi, my latest hobby, and trying to identify bird calls using an app she had installed on my phone months ago. The third morning, everything changed. I was gathering firewood when I spotted something pale hanging from a branch about 15 feet up. At first, I thought it was just some trash left behind by careless hikers. But as I got closer, my blood ran cold. It was a deerskin, complete, unblemished, and impossibly intact. No blood, no tears, no sign of violence. It looked as if the deer had simply stepped out of it. I've seen taxidermied animals before. This was different. The skin was fresh, almost translucent in the morning light, with a weird silvery sheen to it. What really got to me were the edges. They weren't cut or torn. They looked more like openings, like the seams of a costume. I should have left right then. Sheila would have. She always said the wilderness demands respect, and that when something feels wrong, you listen to that instinct. But I convinced myself there must be a logical explanation. Maybe it was some kind of art installation, or perhaps local hunters had strange practices. I took some photos and tried to put it out of my mind. That night, the whispers started. I was drifting off to sleep when I heard it, a sound like dry leaves being crushed underfoot, circling my tent. Then came the breathing, heavy and wet, like someone with fluid in their lungs. I lay perfectly still, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. The footsteps stopped right outside my tent. "Warm," whispered a voice that wasn't quite human. It had too many layers, like multiple people speaking slightly out of sync. "This one's still warm," another voice responded, higher pitched, but with that same unsettling multiplicity. Fresh, supplemental, perfect. I didn't sleep that night. As the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, I finally worked up the courage to unzip my tent. What I found made me wish I hadn't. They were everywhere. Human skins, dozens of them, hanging from the branches like macabre decorations. Men, women, even children, all complete, all hollow, all with those same strange seams. Some were fresh, with that same silvery sheen as the deer skin. Others were older, dried and darkened like ancient parchment. Each face was frozen in an expression of terror. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach lurch. One of the fresher skins looked familiar. It took me a moment to place it, but when I did, my world shattered. The small crescent-shaped scar on the left shoulder, the tiny tattoo behind the ear, it was Sheila. What they found at the bottom of that cliff hadn't been her body. It had been an empty shell. I ran. I'd like to say I was brave, that I tried to investigate or fight back, but primal terror took over. I left everything except my phone and car keys as I sprinted through the forest. I could hear them pursuing me, not just their footsteps, but the horrible sound of their not quite right movements, like leather stretching and creaking. "Such lovely seams," they called after me, "such a perfect fit." I made it to my car, though I still don't remember most of that desperate flight through the woods. The authorities found my abandoned campsite, but of course there were no skins hanging in the trees. Just some loose trash caught in the branches, they said. They're monitoring me now, concerned about my episode. But I know what I saw. More importantly, I know they're still out there. Sometimes I've been finding silvery strands stuck to my clothes, like the delicate threads you might use to sew a costume. My skin feels looser these days. The doctors say it's just anxiety, that I'm imagining things. But this morning, I found something in the mirror that I can't explain away. A thin, silvery line along my shoulder, exactly like the seams I saw in the forest. I think they're coming to finish what they started. And the worst part? Part of me wants to know what it feels like, stepping out of yourself, becoming hollow. Sheila would understand. After all, she's one of them now. If you're reading this and you go camping, remember, not everything that looks human is wearing their fur skin, And if you hear whispers in the night about warmth and perfect fits, run away as fast as you can and never go back, because they're always looking for new skins to wear. The trees in Elderwood Grove don't just sway in the wind, they breathe. I learned this the hard way. I've always found comfort in solitude, especially among ancient trees. That was before I learned that some forms of solitude aren't meant to be disturbed, and some forests prefer to keep their secrets buried. Now, when I hear the wind whisper through leaves, I can't help but wonder if it's really the wind at all. My name is Ava Villa, and I'm a wildlife photographer specializing in old-growth forests. I've spent countless nights alone in the wilderness, documenting the subtle changes that occur when human eyes aren't watching. That's what brought me to the Elderwood Grove, a remote stretch of forest that hadn't been properly surveyed since the 1970s. Local hiking forums mention unusual wind patterns and inexplicable equipment malfunctions, but I dealt with worse. Besides, I needed this shoot for my upcoming exhibition on threatened ecosystems. The trouble started on my second night. I'd set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by towering hemlocks, their trunks wider than my car. The first day had been productive. I captured some stunning shots of rare fungi and what I believed to be an undocumented species of moss. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary except perhaps how quiet it was. No bird song, no scurrying creatures. I chalked it up to the density of the canopy and my own presence disturbing the wildlife. That night, I woke to what sounded like someone with pneumonia struggling to breathe. The sound was distant but distinct. A wet, rattling inhale followed by a long, wheezing exhale. My first thought was that another hiker might be in distress. I grabbed my flashlight and poked my head out of the tent, but the beam revealed only still trees and ground fog. "Hello," I called out. "Is anyone there?" The breathing stopped immediately. The silence that followed was absolute, pressing against my ears like cotton. I waited for several minutes, straining to hear anything, but there was nothing, not even the usual nighttime forest sounds. Just as I was about to go back inside, a gust of wind rushed through the clearing, making the trees sway and creak. Of course, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks. But when I laid back down, I noticed something odd. The wind was moving through the trees in a pattern. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Each breath seemed to draw closer, and with it, the trees appeared to lean inward, their shadows stretching across my tent like grasping fingers. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Trees don't breathe. Trees don't move on their own. I'm a scientist, for God's sake. I know better than to let my imagination run wild. Still, I found myself taking photos of the trees' positions, marking their alignment against my tent's frame, just to prove to myself nothing was changing. When I checked the photos an hour later, my hand started shaking. The trees had moved, not by much, maybe a few degrees, but they were definitely closer to my tent than before. The breathing had grown louder, too, no longer just from one direction, but seemingly from all around me. The sound had a presence to it now, a weight that pressed down on my chest and made my own breathing shallow. I decided to pack up and leave. I'd gotten enough photos anyway, and something about this place felt deeply wrong. But as I started breaking down my tent, my headlamp caught something strange in the undergrowth. Thin, pale tendrils that looked like roots, but moved slightly like seaweed in a current. They weren't there when I set up camp. The breathing suddenly grew louder, and I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Those tendrils were everywhere now, forming a web-like pattern that all led to a central point about 20 feet from my campsite. As I watched, horrified, the earth there began to bulge upward. I abandoned my tent and gear, grabbing only my camera and phone. But when I turned to run, I found my path blocked by trees that I swear weren't that close before. I tried another direction, but it was the same. The forest had closed in around me, forming a tight circle. The breathing was deafening now, and it didn't sound like wind anymore. It sounded hungry. That's when I remembered something I'd read about carnivorous plants and their hunting strategies. Some use chemical lures, others use tripwires, but the most successful ones mimic their prey's natural environment, making them feel safe until it's too late. The ground erupted behind me. I spun around and barely managed to take one photo before running blindly into the forest. Whatever emerged from that hole, I caught only glimpses of pale, fibrous flesh somewhere between fungus and root, pulsing with a sickly bioluminescence. The photo on my camera shows even less, just a blur of white against the darkness. Through sheer force and will, I was able to escape, though the memory is blurry. The next clear memory I have is stumbling onto a hiking trail at dawn, miles from where I'd set up camp. When I reported what happened, the park rangers found my campsite exactly as I'd left it, except there was no sign of any hole, no pale tendrils, and the trees were spaced normally. They suggested I might have gotten turned around in the dark, maybe eaten some bad mushrooms. But I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know that somewhere in the Elderwood Grove there's something ancient and patient, something that's learned to hunt by making the forest itself into a trap. It's still there, breathing, waiting for the next person who thinks they're alone in the woods. I still work as a wildlife photographer, but I don't do solo camping anymore. And when the wind blows through the trees, making that soft rushing sound, I can't help but hold my breath and listen just to make sure it's really the wind I'm hearing. I've spent my entire career studying the secrets of the past, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found beneath Stonehenge. My name is Dr. Elia Marlowe, and this is likely to be my final testimony. If you're reading this, it means I've failed to seal the horror I've unleashed upon our world. It all began on a crisp autumn morning, just weeks before my planned retirement. The fog clung to the ancient stones like a shroud, as if trying to keep their secrets hidden. I'd grown up in the shadow of these monoliths, their mystery a constant whisper in my ear. My grandmother used to tell me stories of the old ways of druids and sacrifices, but even her wildest tales paled in comparison to the truth. I remember the day I decided to become an archaeologist. I was just a boy, no more than 10, playing in the fields near Stonehenge. My friends and I were digging for treasure as children do, when my small shovel struck something hard. It was a piece of pottery, nothing special to the untrained eye, but to me, it was a window into the past. I ran home, clutching my find, and declared to my bemused parents that I would uncover all of Stonehenge's secrets. How naive I was then, how innocent of the horrors that lay dormant beneath the earth. Over the decades, I built my career on studying Neolithic sites across Britain, but Stonehenge always called me back. It was an obsession, a siren song I couldn't resist. I published papers, gave lectures, and slowly climbed the academic ladder, all while feeling that the true secret of the stones remained just out of reach. When the opportunity came for this final excavation, I jumped at the chance. Our team had been granted unprecedented access to conduct ground-penetrating radar surveys around the site. It was supposed to be my swan song, a final contribution to the field I dedicated my life to. If only I'd known then what I know now, I would have walked away and never looked back. The first week of the survey was uneventful. We meticulously gridded the area, taking readings and compiling data. My younger colleagues joked about finding hidden chambers or ancient treasures, but I learned long ago to temper my expectations. Archaeology is often a game of patience, of piecing together the smallest clues to form a larger picture. It was on the 8th day that everything changed. The first anomaly appeared on our screens like a dark smudge, easy to dismiss as a glitch or a natural formation, but as we refined our scans, a pattern emerged. A perfect circle far too precise to be natural, hidden just meters below the surface. My heart raced with excitement, my scientific mind already conjuring images of hidden chambers and ancient artifacts. We began the excavation with painstaking care, every centimeter of soil meticulously documented and preserved. The local press buzzed with speculation, but we kept our findings tightly under wraps. Each layer we removed seemed to vibrate with a strange energy, as if the very earth was holding its breath in anticipation. It wasn't until we reached the capstone that I felt the first inkling of dread. The stone was unlike anything I'd ever seen, darker than obsidian, with strange shifting patterns that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. And the symbols carved into its surface, they weren't like any known ancient script. They seemed to writhe and squirm, making my eyes water if I stared too long. I should have stopped there. I should have reburied everything and warned the world never to dig here again. But curiosity, that damned human trait that's led us to our greatest discoveries and our darkest hours, pushed me forward. It took our entire team to shift the capstone, and as it grated across the ground, a gust of stale, fetid air rushed up from below. The stench was indescribable, not the musty smell of an ancient tomb, but something far older, far wronger. It carried with it whispers, barely audible, in a language that made my skin crawl. The chamber below was vast, far larger than should have been possible given the area we'd excavated. Its walls were lined with the same dark stone as the capstone, pulsing with a sickly greenish light that seemed to absorb the beams from our flashlights. And at its center stood an altar, if you could call it that, a twisted mass of stone and metal shaped into a form that hurt the mind to look upon. I approached it, drawn by an impulse I couldn't explain. The whispers grew louder, and I realized with horror that they were coming from inside my own head. Images flashed before my eyes, vast, incomprehensible beings that existed before time itself, using our reality as a playground, a testing ground, a doorway. I saw great cities of non-Euclidean geometry built by beings of such alien aspect that my mind rebelled at the sight of them. I witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations on distant worlds, each one a mere experiment in the grand designs of these eldritch entities. And I saw Earth, a precious blue marble there, nothing more than a speck of dust in their unfathomable cosmic game. And Stonehenge, it wasn't just a religious monument or an astronomical calendar. It was a lock, a seal keeping something out or in. The standing stones above were keys, their placement a complex mechanism that, when aligned properly, would open a gateway to somewhere else. A place beyond our comprehension, where the laws of physics were mere suggestions and madness was the only sane response. I don't know how long I stood there, my mind reeling from visions no human was meant to comprehend. When I came to my senses, I was alone in the chamber. My team, God, my team. I found what was left of them, scattered around the site, their bodies twisted into impossible shapes, their faces frozen in expressions of absolute terror. Dr. Sarah Chin, my brilliant protégée, lay crumpled at the base of one of the stones, her limbs bent at angles that defied anatomy. Jack Pearson, our geophysicist, was found fused into the very stone he'd spent years studying, his flesh seamlessly melding with the ancient rock. And poor Tom Davis, barely more than an intern, his eyes were gone, replaced by swirling vortexes of that same sickly green light that pulsed within the chamber. I stumbled away from the carnage, my mind teetering on the brink of sanity. The weight of what I'd uncovered pressed down on me, threatening to crush my very soul, but I knew I couldn't succumb. Not yet. Someone had to warn the world, had to try to contain this madness before it spread. I've sealed the entrance as best I could, using a mixture of modern concrete and ancient rituals I half remembered from my grandmother's stories, but I fear it's only a temporary measure. The alignment is coming. I can feel it in my bones, in the thrumming of the air itself. Whatever lies on the other side of that gateway is awakening, stretching, preparing to step through. Each night since that fateful discovery, my dreams have been plagued by visions of what's to come. I see the stones of Stonehenge vibrating with otherworldly energy, the very fabric of reality tearing apart as the gateway opens. Tentacles of impossible size and geometry slide through the breach, followed by entities so vast and alien that the mere sight of them drives people mad. I've tried to warn my colleagues, the authorities, anyone who will listen, but who would believe the ravings of an old man, especially one who can't produce any evidence? The chamber remains sealed, and I dare not open it again, even to prove my story. The risk is too great. So, I'm writing this account in the hope that someone will find it, will understand the danger. Stonehenge must be destroyed, the ground beneath it sown with salt and iron. But even as I write these words, I can feel my resolve weakening. The whispers are getting louder, more insistent. They promise knowledge, power, transcendence. Part of me wants to stay to see what emerges when the stars align and the gateway opens. That's how they get you, I suppose. Not with threats or brute force, but with temptation. The offer of answers to questions we were never meant to ask. I find myself drawn back to the site night after night, standing just beyond the perimeter, staring at the looming silhouettes of the stones against the starry sky. Sometimes I swear I can see shapes moving between them, things that vanish when I try to focus on them. And always there are the whispers. They tell me I'm special, that I was chosen for this, that my lifetime of study and dedication was all in preparation for this moment. They promised me knowledge beyond human comprehension, power beyond mortal reckoning. All I have to do is return to the chamber, to stand before the altar and speak the words that now burn in my mind. But I resist, clinging to the last shreds of my humanity. I think of my granddaughter, of the world I want her to inherit, not one of chaos and madness, but of beauty and wonder. And so I fight, even as I feel my grip on reality slipping day by day. If you're reading this, heed my warning. Stay away from Stonehenge. Forget the mysteries, the allure of discovery. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, some doors left unopened. And if you hear whispers on the wind promising you the world, run. Run and don't look back. For what lies beneath Stonehenge is older than humanity, older than Earth itself, and it hungers for a way back in. I don't know how much longer I can resist the call. Each day is a battle against the knowledge that burns within me, threatening to consume what's left of my sanity. I've made arrangements for this manuscript to be delivered to multiple sources should anything happen to me. It's my last hope, my final stand against the darkness that looms on the horizon. To whoever reads this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for my hubris, for thinking I could uncover the secrets of Stonehenge without consequence. I'm sorry for unleashing a horror upon this world that I cannot hope to contain. And I'm sorry for the burden I now place upon you, the knowledge of what lurks beneath those ancient stones. The alignment is coming. The gateway will open. And when it does, may whatever God still listens have mercy on us all. This is Dr. Elijah Marlowe signing off for the last time. Remember Stonehenge not as a wonder of the ancient world, but as a warning. Some doors are meant to stay closed, some secrets never meant to see the light of day. Farewell and good luck. You're going to need it. I never should have opened that chest. The worn, leather-bound journal sat in my lap, its pages yellowed with age, the scent of musty parchment filling my nostrils. My hands trembled as I traced the faded script on the cover, the true account of Rowan O, as witnessed by Eleanor Dare, my ancestors' words, my legacy, my curse. For years, I'd searched for answers about my family's connection to the lost colony of Roanoke. As a historian specializing in early American settlements, I'd always felt a pull toward that mysterious chapter in our nation's past. But I never imagined the horror that awaited me. It started with the dreams. Visions of dense, mist-shrouded forests. Whispers in a language I couldn't understand. The sensation of being watched by countless unseen eyes. I chalked it up to stress from my obsession with my research. But then I found the chest hidden in the attic of my grandmother's old Virginia home. The ancient oak box had been passed down through generations, its contents a closely guarded secret. When the lock finally gave way beneath my trembling fingers, I knew I'd stumbled upon something momentous. But I had no idea how it would shatter everything I thought I knew about history and about myself. The first few entries in Eleanor's journal were unremarkable. She wrote of the journey across the Atlantic, the hope for a new life in the new world. But as I turned the brittle pages, the tone shifted. Eleanor's neat script grew frantic, the ink blotched with what looked unsettlingly like dried blood. August 18th, 1587. We have been here but a month, and already something is terribly wrong. The forest watches us. It hungers. God help us all. I rid on, my heart pounding. Eleanor told a tale far more terrifying than any disappearance. The colonists hadn't vanished. They'd been claimed. An ancient entity dwelling in the primordial forests of the New World had awakened, hungry for flesh and devotion. It spoke to them in their dreams, promising power and immortality in exchange for sacrifice. Some resisted, Eleanor among them, but as crops failed and children sickened, desperation set in. One by one, the settlers succumbed to the entity's whispers. They ventured into the woods, never to return as humans. September 3rd, 1587. Thomas ventured into the trees at dawn. We heard his screams until nightfall. What emerged, wearing his skin, was not my husband. Those who remained were transformed, their bodies twisted into something inhuman, their minds warped by eldritch knowledge. Eleanor's descriptions made my stomach churn, limbs elongating into branch-like appendages, skin hardening into bark, eyes multiplying across torsos, faces contorting into inhuman masks. The disappearance of the colony was a cover-up, a ritual enacted by the last few unchanged survivors to contain the entity and its transformed acolytes. They erased all trace of Roanoke, sealing away the horror they'd unleashed. We are the last. The entity sleeps, but it is not defeated. We have bound it with blood and sacrifice, but the seal will not hold forever. To those of my blood who may read this in years to come, beware, the forest remembers, and it will call to you. But rituals fade, seals weaken, and bloodlines remember. As I read Eleanor's frantic warnings, I felt a stirring in my blood, an awakening. The entity had slumbered these long centuries, but now it called to me, its last remaining descendant, the one who could complete the circle. I tried to resist. I burned the journal, fled across the country, sought help from experts in fields both scientific and occult. But the dreams grew stronger. The whispers became a cacophony, and slowly I began to change. It started with my skin. Patches grew mottled and rough like tree bark. My hair fell out in clumps, replaced by twisting vines. My bones ached as they elongated and warped. I caught glimpses of myself in mirrors and no longer recognized the thing staring back. The entity's voice grew clearer with each passing day. It showed me visions of power beyond imagining, of secrets hidden since the dawn of time. All I had to do was return to Roanoke, to take my place among my transformed kin, to complete the ritual and usher in a new age of terror. I resisted for as long as I could. I barricaded myself in my apartment, covered all the mirrors, tried to drown out the whispers with endless loops of white noise. But the call of the forest was relentless. It seeped into my dreams, my thoughts, the very marrow of my changing bones. One night, driven to the brink of madness, I found myself standing at the edge of a dense forest. I had no memory of how I'd gotten there, but I knew with terrible certainty where I was. Roanoke Island, home. The trees seemed to part before me, creating a path into the depths of the woods. As I stepped forward, my feet sinking into the loamy soil, I felt a sense of homecoming, of rightness. The whispers in my mind crescendoed into a triumphant roar. Deep in the heart of the forest, I found them, my kin, the lost colonists of Roanoke, transformed beyond recognition into creatures of bark, vine, and hungering shadow. They welcomed me with open arms, dozens of arms twisting and grasping. I should have been terrified. I should have run screaming. But as the entity's presence washed over me, filling me with ancient, terrible knowledge, I felt only peace. This was where I belonged, where we all belonged now. As I write these final words, I can feel the last vestiges of my humanity slipping away. My fingers are elongating, bark creeping up my arms. Soon I will join my brethren in the deep woods, guardians of a slumbering horror. I'm writing this now as a warning, as a confession. My mind is still my own, but I don't know for how much longer. I can feel the pull of the forest, the call of something ancient and hungry stirring beneath the soil of Roanoke Island. If you're reading this, it may already be too late. The entity is awakening. The lost colonists are stirring in their ageless slumber, and I am going home. To those who come seeking answers about Roanoke, I beg you, stay away. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some truths are too horrible to face. The wind outside my window sounds like whispers now. Branches scrape against glass with fingernail-like precision. I have to go. It's calling me. Remember Roanoke. Remember and beware. For the forest is patient. The forest is hungry. And the forest never forgets its own. I've carried this secret for far too long. The weight of it has bent my spine and whitened my hair, but it's nothing compared to the burden of knowing what's out there waiting in those cursed mountains. You've all heard of the Dyatlov Pass incident, I'm sure. 9 hikers found dead under mysterious circumstances. But what you don't know, what they've kept hidden all these years, is that there was a 10th member of our group, me. My name is Nikolai Andreev, and I'm the sole survivor of what really happened in the Ural Mountains on that frigid February night in 1959. I was 24 then, a student like the others, but with one crucial difference. I'd spent my childhood summers with my grandfather, an old hunter who taught me the ways of the taiga. Those skills saved my life, but sometimes I wonder if death wouldn't have been kinder. We were young, ambitious, ready to conquer the world one mountain at a time. The trek to Mount Otorten was supposed to be challenging, but not impossible. How could we have known we were walking into the hunting grounds of something ancient and hungry? I remember the day we set out like it was yesterday. The sky was a pale, wintry blue, and our breath frosted in the air as we shouldered our packs. Igor Dyatlov, our unofficial leader, checked our supplies one last time. His confidence was infectious, and we all felt invincible. Yuri strummed his mandolin, and Lyudmila's laughter rang out across the snow. We were 10 friends on an adventure, blissfully unaware of the horror that awaited us. The first few days were uneventful, filled with the kind of camaraderie that only comes from shared challenges. We'd huddle around the campfire at night, sharing stories and dreams. Tatiana talked about the thesis she was working on, while Alexandra regaled us with jokes that had us clutching our sides with laughter. Those moments of joy make what followed all the more terrible. As we ventured deeper into the pass, the landscape began to change subtly. The trees became more gnarled, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. An unnatural silence fell over the land. The wind stopped whispering through the pines, and even our breath seemed muffled in the still air. It was Igor who first sensed something was wrong. "We're being watched," he said, his eyes darting nervously across the snowy slopes. We laughed it off, but a seed of unease had been planted. That night, as I took my turn on watch, I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were boring into me from the darkness beyond our camp. The next day, we found strange tracks in the snow, too large for any animal we knew, with an odd shuffling gait that made no sense. Rustem, our resident expert on local wildlife, was baffled. "I've never seen anything like this," he muttered, a worried crease between his brows. That night, huddled in our tents, we heard it, a low, pulsating hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It taunted us, burrowing into our minds, setting our teeth on edge. Yuri suggested it was just the wind, but we all knew better. There was something out there, circling our camp. None of us slept well. In the morning, Lyudmila reported having vivid, terrifying nightmares. "I saw something in the mountains," she said, her voice shaking. "Something old, something waiting." We tried to comfort her, but her words had struck a chord of primal fear in all of us. As we continued our trek, the feeling of wrongness grew stronger. The landscape seemed to shift when we weren't looking directly at it. More than once, I could have sworn I saw shadows moving against the white of the snow, only for them to vanish when I turned my head. On our final night, though we didn't know it then, we made camp on the slopes of YAKLICH, a name which translates to Dead Mountain in the local Mansi language. That should have been warning enough, but we were tired, cold, and eager to make progress. I woke to screams. The night was alive with chaos, tent fabric ripping, people shouting in terror. I burst out into the frigid air and saw, I still struggle to describe it. It wasn't a creature, not in any sense we understand. It was like a tear in reality, a writhing mass of darkness that hurt to look at directly. Tentacles of shadow whipped through the air, and where they touched, the very fabric of the world seemed to warp and twist. My friends were running, scattering in all directions. I saw Lyudmila stumble, her body contorting unnaturally as the thing's influence took hold. Zina and Semyon were clawing at their own faces, driven mad by what they'd seen. Igor was shouting orders, trying to rally us, but his words were swallowed by the otherworldly hum that now filled the air. I ran. God help me, I ran. My grandfather's training took over. Find cover, stay low, control your breathing. I wedged myself into a crevice between two boulders, praying to whatever might listen that the thing wouldn't find me. For hours, I listened to the screams of my friends echoing across the mountain. One by one, they fell silent. The hum grew louder, filling my head until I thought my skull would split. I bit down on my glove to keep from crying out, tasting blood and wool and fear. When dawn finally broke, I emerged to a scene of impossible horror. Bodies strewn across the snow, broken in ways that defied explanation. Some looked as though they'd been crushed by an immense weight, while others bore no visible marks at all. Their faces were frozen in expressions of utmost terror, and always that lingering sense of wrongness in the air. I searched desperately for survivors, but found none. The entity, whatever it was, had vanished with the night, but I could feel its presence lingering like oil on water. This was its territory, and we had been nothing but prey. Gathering what supplies I could, I began the long, harrowing journey down the mountain. Every shadow, every unexplained sound set my heart racing. I felt certain that at any moment that tear, in reality, would reappear, and I would join my friends in whatever lay beyond. I made my way down the mountain in a day, my mind struggling to process what I'd witnessed. When I finally reached civilization, I tried to tell them, the police, the search parties, anyone who would listen. But they didn't believe me. How could they? It was easier to blame the cold, or an avalanche, or even Soviet military tests. A week after I'd given my statement, 2 men in dark suits came to see me. They knew everything about the entity, about similar incidents stretching back centuries. They showed me files, photographs of other expeditions that had vanished in the same region. Some dated back to the Tsarist era, yellowed pages filled with accounts of shadows that walk and the watcher in the mountains. They made it clear I was to never speak of what I'd seen. The world wasn't ready for the truth. They offered me a choice: keep silent and live, or persist in telling my story and face consequences. The threat was clear in their eyes. For decades, I've kept my silence, watching from afar as theories and documentaries tried to explain what happened to my friends. I've seen the photos of the search parties, the confused reports trying to make sense of the senseless. Every time I see those familiar faces in old photographs, Igor's confident smile, Lyudmila's bright eyes, my heart breaks anew. I've tried to move on, to build a life. I married, had children, pursued a quiet career far from the mountains. But the memories never faded. On cold nights, I still wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of that otherworldly hum ringing in my ears. Over the years, I've done my own research, quietly and carefully. I found whispers of similar incidents across the world, expeditions that vanished without a trace, lone travelers found in impossible circumstances, always in remote places, always with the same sense of wrongness surrounding them. The thing in Dyatlov Pass is still there. I feel it sometimes in my dreams. The otherworldly hum, the sense of being watched. It's waiting, as it has for millennia, for more unsuspecting souls to wander into its domain. I thought about going back, of trying to find proof, or maybe even confront it. But the fear is too great. I know that if I return to those mountains, I won't come back. I'm an old man now, and I fear what might happen if this secret dies with me. The world has changed. Maybe people are ready to hear the truth, to understand that there are things out there beyond our comprehension. Or maybe I'm just a coward, finally trying to unburden myself of this terrible knowledge. I don't expect you to believe me. Sometimes I'm not sure I believe it myself. But the next time you're in the wilderness and feel that prickle on the back of your neck, that certainty that something's watching you from just beyond the tree line, remember my warning. Not all predators in this world are ones we can understand, and some hungers can never be satisfied. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains officially unsolved, but I know the truth. I've lived with it for over 60 years, and as I write these words, I can't shake the feeling that somewhere in the cold peaks of the Ural, something ancient and patient is stirring once more. God help us all if it ever decides to leave its mountain home. The Bermuda Triangle isn't just a place where things disappear, it's where they're taken. I know because I was one of them for 42 years. I was trapped in a nightmare beyond imagination. Now that I'm back, I almost wish I'd stayed lost. The horrors I've seen, the things I've experienced, they've changed me in ways I can't even begin to describe, but I have to try. People need to know the truth about what's out there waiting in that timeless abyss. My name is Jack Hawkins. In 1982, I was a 28-year-old sailor with salt in my veins and adventure in my heart. I'd grown up on the docks of Miami, learning to tie knots before I could write my name. The sea was my home, my love, my life. Little did I know it would become my prison. It was supposed to be a routine cargo run to Bermuda. Clear skies, calm seas, perfect sailing weather. I remember joking with my crew as we entered the triangle. We'd all heard the stories, of course, but none of us really believed them. They were just tall tales to scare the greenhorns, right? I remember checking my watch as we crossed into those infamous waters, 2:14 p.m., July 17th, 1982. That was the last time I saw a clock for over 4 decades. The change was sudden. One moment, we were cutting through blue waves under a blazing sun. The next, we were enveloped in an impenetrable fog. The air grew thick, almost gelatinous, and breathing became difficult, like trying to inhale syrup. I tried to call out to my crew, but my voice sounded muffled, as if I were shouting underwater. Then came the silence, the constant hum of the ship's engines, the lapping of waves against the hull. All of it vanished in an instant. In that deafening quiet, I heard something else. Whispers, countless voices speaking in languages I'd never heard, some that didn't even sound human. It was like listening to the murmur of a crowded room, but the words were all wrong. The cadences were alien and unsettling. I don't know how long we drifted in that fog. Time. It didn't work right there. Sometimes the sun would rise and set in what felt like minutes. Other times, the night would stretch on for what seemed like weeks. My watch had stopped, its hands frozen at 2:14, but it wasn't just broken. Sometimes I'd look at it, and the hands would be in different positions, as if it was trying to tell time but couldn't quite remember how. The fog played tricks on our minds. We'd see things, impossible things, islands that appeared and disappeared in the blink of an eye, sea creatures larger than our ship, their bodies twisting in ways that defied physics. Once, I swear, I saw another ship sailing alongside us. It looked ancient, like something out of a history book. I called out to it, and for a moment I locked eyes with a man on its deck. He looked as terrified as I felt. Then the ship was gone, swallowed by the fog. It was during one of those endless nights that I first saw them. We called them time wraiths. Imagine a shadow-given form, constantly shifting and writhing. They moved through the air like oil through water, leaving trails of distorted reality in their wake. When they passed nearby, I could feel time stretching and compressing around me. One moment, I'd be young again, the next, ancient and withered. The pain was excruciating, like my very atoms were being pulled apart and slammed back together. The wraiths took my crew one by one. I'd hear a scream cut short, and another sailor would be gone. I don't know if they were killed or something else. All I know is that eventually I was alone on a ghost ship, drifting through an endless foggy void. I learned to hide from the wraiths. I discovered that they couldn't see me if I held my breath and remained perfectly still. So I'd spend hours, maybe days, crouched in dark corners, not daring to move a muscle as they glided by. The hunger and thirst were maddening, but fear kept me motionless. Sometimes I'd emerge from hiding to find that weeks had passed in what felt like hours to me. Other times, I'd hide for what seemed like months, only to come out and find that mere minutes had elapsed. But the true horror wasn't the wraiths. It was the visions. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw glimpses of other worlds, other times, ancient cities made of crystal, vast deserts of purple sand, oceans of liquid fire, and always I saw my home, Miami, changing, growing, evolving as the years passed me by. I watched my family age, saw my parents die, witnessed my little sister get married and have children of her own. It was like a cruel movie playing behind my eyelids, showing me everything I was missing. There were others trapped in the triangle with me, not just from my time, but from all throughout history. I met a Roman centurion, his armor corroded by time, but his body unchanged. We couldn't speak the same language, but the terror in his eyes needed no translation. I encountered a pilot from World War II, still frantically searching for her squadron, and once, in what seemed like a fever dream, I spoke with a woman in strange futuristic clothing who claimed to be from the year 2157. We were all trapped in the same timeless prison, our stories frozen while the world moved on without us. I don't know how I escaped. One moment I was huddled in the ship's hold, hiding from a particularly persistent wraith. The next, I was standing on a beach in the Florida Keys, coughing up seawater, a family having a picnic nearby called 911. When the paramedics arrived, they couldn't believe their eyes. To them, I was a living ghost, a man who hadn't aged a day since he disappeared in 1982. The world had moved on without me. My parents were gone. My little sister was a grandmother. The docks I grew up on had been replaced by luxury condos. Everything was louder, faster, more crowded. I felt like a relic, a man out of time. The technology alone was overwhelming. Smartphones, social media, self-driving cars. It was like I'd stepped into one of those sci-fi movies we used to watch on the ship during long voyages. The doctor couldn't explain my condition. Physically, I was the same 28-year-old who had set sail in 1982. But my mind, that was different. I had memories spanning decades, experiences that had aged me far beyond my years. The government got involved, of course. I spent months being debriefed, tested, studied. They wanted to know everything about the triangle, about the wraiths, about the other dimension. But how could I explain the inexplicable? How could I make them understand what it felt like to be unmoored in time? But that wasn't the worst of it, because I brought something back with me. The wraiths, they followed me. I see them sometimes out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of movement in a mirror, a shadow where there shouldn't be one. They're hunting me, and they're learning. At first, they could only manifest for split seconds in our world, but they're getting stronger. Last week, I saw one fully materialize in my backyard. It hovered there for almost a minute before dissipating. They're figuring out how to exist in our reality, and I'm terrified of what will happen when they master it. I've tried to warn people, but who would believe me? A man who claims he was trapped in another dimension for 40 years. They chalk it up to trauma, to PTSD. They don't understand the danger we're all in. The nightmares are the worst. Every night, I'm back in that fog, running from the wraiths. But now, the fog is spreading, engulfing cities, countries, the whole world. I wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, convinced that this time it wasn't just a dream. I started noticing things, subtle changes in the world around me. Sometimes, just for a moment, time seems to slow down or speed up. I'll see people freeze in mid-motion or move at impossible speeds. Once, I swear I saw a car on the highway vanish into thin air, only to reappear a few seconds later, its driver oblivious to what had happened. The Bermuda Triangle isn't just a place where things disappear. It's a breach, a weak point between dimensions. And now, thanks to me, that breach is widening. The wraiths are coming, and they're hungry for time. Our time. They feed on it, distort it, destroy it. And with each passing day, their influence grows stronger. I'm telling you, this is a warning. If you see a shadow move in a way it shouldn't, if you feel time slow down or speed up around you, run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Because the wraiths are here, and they're looking for new victims to drag into their timeless abyss. I've tried to find others like me, other survivors of the triangle. I've reached out to conspiracy theorists, paranormal researchers, anyone who might believe my story. A few have listened. Some have even shared their own experiences, tales of lost time, impossible visions of brushes with entities that defy explanation. We're forming a network, trying to track the wraith's movements, to understand their patterns. But it feels like we're always one step behind. As for me, I'm going back to the triangle. Maybe if I offer myself up, they'll leave this world alone. Or maybe I'll find a way to close the breach for good. I spent months preparing, studying oceanography, meteorology, even quantum physics. I've chartered a boat, gathered supplies. Tomorrow, I set sail for the coordinates where I disappeared all those years ago. I don't know what I'll find there. Maybe the fog will be waiting for me, ready to swallow me up again. Maybe I'll find nothing but empty ocean. Or maybe, just maybe, I'll find answers. A way to stop the wraiths, to seal the breach, to save our world from the horrors lurking in that timeless dimension. By the time you hear this, I'll be gone, one way or another. This is my last message to the world. Remember my story. Stay away from the triangle. And if you ever find yourself lost in that foggy void, do what I did. Hold your breath, stay still, and pray that the wraiths don't find you. Because once they do, you'll be trapped in a nightmare that lasts for eternity, just like I was. And if you ever feel time slip around you, if you ever catch a glimpse of a writhing shadow in the corner of your eye, remember, they're here. The wraiths have found our world, and they're hungry. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and whatever you do, don't let them catch you. The Phoenix Lights weren't just UFOs, they were the first wave, and they've been here ever since. I know because I was there, coordinating the Air Force's response from Luke Air Force Base. Colonel Jack Harmon, at your service. Well, former colonel. I doubt I'll keep my rank after breaking nearly 3 decades of silence, but the truth needs to come out, even if it destroys me. You've probably heard the official story. Flares, military exercises, mass hysteria. It's all expletive. What really happened that night in March 1997 was the beginning of the end for humanity as we know it, and I've been carrying this burden for far too long. I remember every detail of that night like it was yesterday. The cool desert air, the stars twinkling innocently above, completely unaware of the chaos about to unfold. I was pulling a late shift, nothing unusual for a Friday night. We'd been tracking some anomalous radar signals for the past week, but Brass told us it was probably just some glitch in the system. If only it had been that simple. At 2017, the first calls started coming in. Civilians reporting strange lights in the sky, moving in perfect formation. I brushed it off at first. You'd be surprised how often people mistake normal aircraft for UFOs. But then the volume of calls exploded. This wasn't just a few confused stargazers. Something big was happening. I remember picking up the red phone, the one that connected directly to my superior, General Hawthorne. "Sir," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "we've got a situation here." There was a long pause on the other end, too long. When the general finally spoke, his voice was tight and controlled. "Colonel Harmon, initiate Protocol Zulu 9. This is not a drill." I repeat, this is not a drill. My blood ran cold. Zulu 9 was a protocol I'd only ever seen in training exercises, a response to confirmed extraterrestrial contact. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. I scrambled a couple of F-16s to intercept. Standard procedure. What wasn't standard was the sudden appearance of black SUVs and men in suits at our base. They took over our comms, feeding us coordinates, barking orders. These guys weren't from the Air Force, probably NSA or some shadowy agency I'd never heard of. The pilots reported visual contact with something. Their voices were tense, confused. "Sir, this doesn't make sense. It's changing shape. Oh, God." Then static. Both jets went dark simultaneously. That's when all hell broke loose. Alarms blared, radar systems went haywire, and a blinding light flooded the base. For a moment, I thought I was dead. When my vision cleared, they were there, among us. They looked human, mostly, but their eyes empty, reflective, like polished obsidian, and their movements were too fluid, too precise. I'll never forget the chill that ran down my spine when one locked eyes with me and smiled. It wasn't a human smile. The men in black seemed to know them, speaking in hushed tones, words like integration and assimilation floating around. I was ushered out, debriefed, and sworn to secrecy. They said it was a matter of national security and that the public wasn't ready for the truth. For years, I kept quiet. I watched the news, saw the ridiculous flare explanation, and noticed the subtle changes in society, technology, and politics. They were infiltrating every level, slowly but surely, hybrid beings, part human, part something else. Products of a long-term plan we'd unknowingly agreed to. I tried to live a normal life after that night. Got married, had kids, tried to forget. But how do you forget something like that? How do you look at the world the same way when you know it's really out there? I started noticing things, little things at first, the way some people moved just a bit too smoothly, the way technology seemed to advance in sudden leaps as if guided by an unseen hand, the subtle shift in our culture towards uniformity, towards a kind of eerie calmness in the face of global chaos. I tried to investigate discreetly, of course. I reached out to some of the other officers who were there that night. Most wouldn't talk to me. Those who did seemed changed. Their words were right, but their eyes were wrong, empty, like they'd been hollowed out and filled with something else. One night, about 5 years after the incident, I got a visit from an old friend, Major Tom Rye. He'd been one of the pilots that night, one of the ones we thought we'd lost. He showed up at my door looking haggard, desperate. "Jack," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "they're everywhere. They're in our governments, our schools, our families. We didn't stop an invasion that night. We opened the door for one." Before I could ask him more, a black van pulled up. 2 men in suits got out. Tom's eyes went wide with fear. He shoved a USB drive into my hand and ran. I never saw him again. The drive contained files, hundreds of them, satellite images, medical reports, classified memos. It painted a picture of a world already lost, humanity being slowly but surely replaced by something other. Why am I speaking out now? Because it's gone too far. Last month, my granddaughter was born. When I held her and looked into her eyes, I saw that same obsidian gleam. My son and daughter-in-law act like nothing's wrong, but their behavior has changed. They're too calm, too accepting. I think they've been replaced. The Phoenix Lights weren't a first contact scenario. They were a coming out party, a signal that the final stage was beginning. We're not being invaded. We're being phased out, replaced by something that looks like us but isn't. I'm breaking my silence because someone needs to know to fight back. But I'm not naive. By the time you hear this, I'll probably be gone, disappeared, replaced, or worse. Look around you. Look closely at your friends, your family, your coworkers. Do you really know who they are anymore? They're among us, and they're patient. The lights in the sky were just the beginning. The real horror is the shadows walking beside us every day, wearing familiar faces, waiting for the right moment to shed their human disguise. You might be wondering why they don't just take over all at once, why the slow, methodical replacement. I've thought about this a lot. I think they need us, at least for now. They need our world, our infrastructure, our knowledge. They're learning from us, becoming us until one day they won't need us anymore. And the scariest part, most people will never notice. The change is too gradual, too subtle. By the time it's obvious, it'll be too late. If you're listening to this, you're one of the few who know the truth. Be careful. Trust no one, and whatever you do, don't look too long into anyone's eyes. You might not like what you see staring back at you. This is Colonel Jack Harmon, signing off. If I don't make it, remember, the truth is out there, hiding in plain sight. God help us all. Yes, if you're hearing this, it means my worst fears have come true. I've set up this recording to be released automatically if I don't check in regularly. So if you're listening, I'm already gone. But don't let my sacrifice be in vain. The truth is out there now. Use it. Fight back. It might already be too late for me, but maybe, just maybe, it's not too late for humanity. Remember, they're watching. They're always watching. Good luck. You're going to need it.